Hello story enthusiasts. Welcome to Supreme Harry. Today we venture into Harry collapsed at Gringotts and woke up as heir to 19 ancient houses and true ruler of all Britain. Your support means everything. Like and subscribe. Enjoy. Chapter 1. The floor of Gringotts. The owl arrived on a Tuesday, which Harry had always found was the worst day of the week for bad news. He was sitting at the kitchen table at number 4, Privet Drive, eating toast he didn't particularly want while Uncle Vernon read the newspaper with the aggressive concentration of a man pretending his nephew didn't exist. The owl, a ministry bird, grey and officious looking, dropped a letter directly onto Harry's plate, scattering crumbs across the table, and Uncle Vernon's jaw tightened so hard Harry was surprised he didn't crack a molar. The letter was from Gringotts. Not the ministry, not Dumbledore, not the order. Gringotts. The seal was heavy gold wax pressed with a goblin's profile, and the parchment was the thick, cream-colored kind that cost more per sheet than most people spent on lunch. Mr. H. J. Potter, it read, is required to attend Gringotts Bank, Diagon Alley, on or before the 15th of July, for a matter of significant inheritance consequence. Transportation has been arranged. Please be prepared at 9 o'clock on the morning of the 12th. Harry read it twice. Then a third time. Inheritance was the word that snagged, because his parents had died when he was 1 and he'd already been to their vault, the one Hagrid had taken him to, nearly 5 years ago now, the one with the enormous pile of gold that had made 11-year-old Harry feel something complicated and guilty he still hadn't entirely worked out. But this wasn't about Vault 687. The letter's careful, formal language made that very clear without saying so directly, which was a very goblin way of communicating. He was at the Leaky Cauldron by 8:45, having been collected by a pair of aurors who said almost nothing during the drive to London and waited outside while he walked through to Diagon Alley. The summer morning was already warm. The alley was quieter than he remembered, people moved with their heads down and their shopping done quickly, the way they'd moved in the weeks after Cedric's death, when everyone was half afraid to look at anyone else directly. It was worse now. The prophet had spent the better part of June insisting Voldemort's return was either a lie or an exaggeration, and the ministry was backing that line hard enough that most people didn't know what to believe. Harry knew. He'd been there. He pushed open the bronze doors of Gringotts and the cool marble interior swallowed him whole. The head teller, a goblin with a face like a dried apple and eyes that had seen centuries of human foolishness, looked up from his ledger the moment Harry stepped through the door. Not with the indifferent attention that goblins usually offered their customers. With something that might, on a goblin, have been anticipation. "Mr. Potter," the goblin said. "You are expected. My name is Ragnarok. I am the director of Gringotts, London branch. Please follow me." Harry blinked. He'd been to Gringotts enough times to know that the director did not personally collect customers from the door. He followed without comment, because he'd learned over 5 years of magical education that the moments worth paying attention to were usually the ones that didn't announce themselves. Ragnarok led him not to the teller windows, not to the cart tunnels, but through a heavy iron door set into the wall behind the main desk, a door Harry had never noticed before, and down a corridor lit by green-flamed torches. The air changed as they descended, cooler, older, with a mineral weight to it like being deep underground. 2 more goblins fell into step behind them without a word. They entered a chamber that had clearly not been designed for human comfort. The ceiling was low, the chairs were stone, and the walls were covered floor to ceiling in carved runes that glowed faintly amber. In the center of the room was a basin, not the silver pensive kind from Dumbledore's office, but a wide, flat bowl of black stone with a thin layer of something that shimmered like mercury. Ragnarok gestured to the chair nearest the basin. "Sit, if you'd like," he said. "Though what happens next may make sitting difficult." Harry sat. "What's happening?" "We will explain as it occurs. It is better that way." Ragnarok settled across from him, folding his long-fingered hands on the stone table. "What do you know of magical inheritance testing, Mr. Potter?" "Not much. I know Gringotts handles it. I know it involves blood. Blood, yes. Also magic. Also truth. Ragnar's ancient eyes studied him with an intensity that made Harry feel like he was being appraised for something. We have been waiting for this meeting for some time. 3 years, to be specific. We became aware of certain irregularities in your magical signature when you first visited this bank at age 11. At the time, we could not act. The enchantments suppressing your inheritance were layered, complex, and bound to your own life force in ways that made interference potentially fatal. Harry kept his expression neutral. Someone put enchantments on me. Several someones, across several years. There was something in Ragnar's voice, not quite anger, but the goblin equivalent of it, the controlled, banked kind. We are a bank, Mr. Potter. We do not involve ourselves in political matters. But inheritance is our domain. What was done to yours is, he paused with the precision of someone selecting a word carefully, an affront. Right, Harry said. So what do we do about it? Ragnar allowed the ghost of something that might have been approval to cross his face. He nodded to one of the goblins standing at the wall, who produced a small silver knife and brought it to the table. Your blood on the stone. The inheritance ritual will do the rest. Harry didn't hesitate. He pressed his palm to the knife, it was quick, shallow, barely a sting, and held his hand over the basin. 3 drops of blood fell into the mercury-like surface and disappeared. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the stone began to glow. It started amber, the same color as the runes on the walls, and Harry felt something stir in his chest, not magic exactly, or not the magic he knew, the wand magic that had a temperature and a direction. This was older. This was the kind of feeling you got standing in a very old building, or looking at something that had been there long before you and would be there long after. It radiated up through the stone chair, through the floor, through the soles of his trainers. Then it hit. It came from everywhere at once, and the closest Harry could describe it, later, was like every door in a very large house being blown open simultaneously. Something in his chest cracked, not painfully, or not only painfully, but with the enormous relief of something that has been compressed far too long finally getting room to breathe. His vision whited out. He heard Ragnar say something sharp to the other goblins in their language. He didn't feel himself fall out of the chair. He just felt the floor, suddenly, and the distant cool of the stone against his cheek, and then nothing. He came back to consciousness the way you surface from very deep water, slowly, in stages, aware of pressure releasing by degrees. The first thing he noticed was that the pain was gone. Not just the immediate pain of whatever had just happened, a deeper pain he hadn't consciously registered in years, a low-level grinding tension that lived somewhere behind his sternum, as constant and unnoticed as the sound of traffic. It was simply gone. The absence of it felt enormous. The second thing he noticed was the rings. There were 19 of them, arranged in a neat row on the stone table beside his head. Each was different, different metals, different stones, different ages, some so old the engravings on their bands had worn to near invisibility. They ranged from a heavy gold signet to a slim band of something that looked like black iron. He sat up slowly. Ragnar was still sitting across from him, watching with the same careful attention. The 2 other goblins had been joined by 3 more, all standing at the edges of the room. How long was I out? Harry asked. 40 minutes. Ragnar's voice was measured. The suppression enchantments were more extensive than we anticipated. Their removal caused a significant magical eruption. 3 floors above us, every teller window cracked. We told the customers it was a structural survey. Harry looked at his hands. They felt different, not physically, but in the way a locked-up room feels different when the windows are finally opened. Tell me about the rings. Ragnar picked up a scroll from somewhere, it had been produced so smoothly Harry hadn't seen where from, and unrolled it on the table. It was covered in a dense column of names, each accompanied by dates and symbols Harry didn't recognize. The House of Potter, Ragnar began, is the most recent of your inheritances. Through your father, James Fleamont Potter, you are the last direct heir. This is the inheritance you were aware of. He set one of the rings, the gold signet, slightly apart from the others. Through your mother, Lily Joanna Potter, née Evans, the situation is considerably more complex. My mother was Muggle-born. Your mother was believed to be Muggle-born, Ragnock corrected, with the very careful emphasis of someone who has spent a long time waiting to say something. Lily Evans was, in fact, the last descendant of a squib line, a magical line that had gone dormant over 4 generations, losing its active magic entirely, to the point where the Evans family had no memory of their heritage. The line was Peveril. The name landed in a quiet room like a stone in still water. Peveril, Harry repeated. The Peveril line did not simply end, Mr. Potter. It fragmented into 3 branches, the 3 brothers. Those branches spread, diversified, some went dormant. Yours was one of the dormant branches, which by the laws of magical inheritance retained all rights and seats in suspended status, to be claimed by the first active magical descendant. Ragnock's finger moved down the scroll. But the Peveril line itself carried absorbed inheritances, houses that swore fealty to the Peverils before the Hogwarts founders were born, before the Wizengamot existed, before recorded magical history as you know it. The seat of the true ruler is among them. Harry looked at him steadily. What is the seat of the true ruler? Britain's magical land has a memory, Ragnock said. Not unlike a goblin's. When this island's magical population first organized itself into governance, long before your ministry, long before the Wizengamot, long before Merlin, they established a compact with the land itself. The land would sustain the magical community, provide power, anchor wards. In return, a single line would hold the seat, not as a monarch in the human sense, but as a steward. Someone the land recognized. Someone with the authority to speak for the compact. He paused. The last person to hold the seat was Morgan Le Fay, roughly 1100 years ago. After her death, the line went dormant, and the Wizengamot gradually assumed the functions of governance. Most wizards alive today believe the seat is a legend. But it isn't. It is not. It was merely waiting. Ragnock looked at Harry with those ancient eyes. The eruption you caused when you touched this stone, we felt it in the bedrock. The land recognized you, Mr. Potter. It has been waiting for 1100 years, and it recognized you within seconds. The room was very quiet. Somewhere above them, Gringotts continued its business. Harry could feel, distantly and dimly, the vibration of the carts in the tunnels, and outside, Diagon Alley went about its cautious summer morning, and none of them knew that the boy sitting at a stone table in a subterranean chamber had just become the first person in over a millennium to hold a magical claim over the whole of Britain. Harry picked up the nearest ring, the slim black iron one, which had an inscription he couldn't read but felt somehow familiar, like a word you know but can't immediately place. It slid onto his right index finger as though it had been made for him, which, he supposed, it had. He felt a click, somewhere deep. Like a lock engaging rather than opening. Tell me about the suppressions, he said. Who put them on me? When? And why? Ragnock exchanged a look with the goblin to his left, a look that communicated something in a language made entirely of small muscle movements and ancient professional courtesy. Then he said, the first enchantment was placed when you were 15 months old. It was keyed to the killing curse's residual energy. Whoever cast it used Voldemort's failed curse as an anchor point, which was, from a technical standpoint, extraordinary work. Dark work, but extraordinary. That enchantment suppressed approximately 40% of your active magic and all awareness of your inheritance. 15 months old, Harry said, very levelly. Someone had to be there when the killing curse hit. Someone who knew what it had done and acted within hours. Yes. Who placed the second enchantment? The second was placed when you were 5 years old. A lighter touch, a refinement of the first, designed to cap your accidental magic so it would register as ordinary orphan-level talent. It carried the distinctive signature of the Fidelius Charms architecture. Whoever cast it was extremely proficient with complex charm work. Ragnar's voice stayed neutral and professional. The third enchantment was placed the night you were sorted into Hogwarts. This one was the most sophisticated. It was designed to ensure that as your magic naturally developed, your inheritance remained hidden. It was tied to Hogwarts itself, using the school's wards as a power source. Hogwarts wards, Harry said. Yes. Someone with access to Hogwarts' foundational ward structures. Yes, Mr. Potter. Harry set the black iron ring down on the table and picked up the next one, heavier, bronze, with a dark red stone. It too slid on without resistance. You said 3 enchantments. I said the suppressions were layered. 3 was the number I enumerated specifically. There were 17 in total, each successive one placed to compensate for growth, for power development, for the magical crises you experienced each year that threatened to break the earlier work. Ragnar unrolled a second scroll and placed it beside the first. The work represents a significant investment of time and effort across 15 years. Whoever performed it was not acting on impulse. Harry looked at the second scroll. The dates were exact: September 1981, June 1986, September 1991, June 1992, September 1992, and so on, year after year, neat as clockwork, each one a maintenance visit to the enchantment suppressing who he actually was. He didn't feel rage, exactly. Or he did, but it was very cold and very still, the way very deep water is cold, not immediately apparent from the surface. He picked up the third ring. This one was gold with tiny embedded runes around the band. What is the full list of houses? Ragnar nodded to a third goblin, who produced a longer scroll, this one clearly prepared in advance, and read from it in a voice that carried the formal weight of legal declaration. The House of Potter. The House of Black, by blood adoption through your godfather Sirius Orion Black, who named you sole heir before his imprisonment, the naming was never registered but is valid under goblin law. Harry's jaw tightened very slightly at Sirius's name. He kept putting on rings. The House of Peveril. The House of Gryffindor, by descent through the Peveril-Gryffindor alliance of 978 AD. The House of Slytherin, Harry looked up. By conquest, the goblin said, meeting his gaze steadily. You destroyed the last heir of Slytherin's line. Under ancient magical law, conquest of a lord transfers the house's seat in the absence of other heirs. Voldemort left none. Harry set down the ring he was holding and thought about that for a long moment. Then he picked it back up and continued. The list went on. The House of Merlin, descended through Peveril. The House of Lefay, which explained the seat of the true ruler. The House of Emrys. 6 further ancient houses whose names Harry didn't recognize, predating the Norman conquest. 2 houses absorbed through the Black Line. The House of Flamel, whose last direct heir had died in 1992 and whose seat had been in suspended status since. 19 houses. By the time the goblin finished reading, Harry was wearing 9 rings and the rest were still on the table. He was aware, in a way he hadn't been when he walked in, of the stone floor beneath him. It was a strange awareness, not visual, not the way you're aware of something you can see, but more like the way you're aware of your own heartbeat. The land. It knew he was here. The bedrock of Britain, all the way down, had registered him like a note struck on a tuning fork and was still humming. He picked up the remaining rings and put them on. The last one, the Potter signet, the one he'd known about, the one that was supposed to be the entirety of his inheritance, he held for a moment before sliding it onto his right thumb, where it joined the others. The amber glow from the basin pulsed once, warmly, and went dark. What rights come with the seat of the true ruler? Harry asked. In practical terms, Ragnar said carefully, the seat grants you authority over the foundational ward structures of magical Britain, Hogwarts, the Ministry, Azkaban, Hogsmeade, Diagon Alley, and 17 other established magical sites. Not control, exactly, but recognition. The wards know you. They will respond to your intent. He folded his hands. It also grants you a full voting block on the Wisengamot. The ancient houses carry seats, and yours represent a controlling interest. Historically, the Wisengamot cannot pass legislation over the objection of the seat of the true ruler. And no one has held it for 1100 years. No one has held it for 1100 years. Harry looked at his hands. 23 years old of rings on 10 fingers, 19 of them, because he'd had to double up on a few, catching the green torchlight. He was 16 years old and he felt, for the first time in his life, completely and entirely like himself. "I have some questions about Dumbledore," he said. The room got very still. "That is," Ragnock said, with precisely the tone of a very experienced banker choosing his words, "a matter that falls within your rights to pursue through Goblin audit. We hold records of all magical contract interactions with your vaults. We are obligated to share them with the vault holder upon request. Then I'd like to request them." Ragnock produced a third scroll without hesitation. Harry suspected he had been carrying it since the moment he'd arranged this meeting 3 years ago, waiting for a Potter who could finally ask for it. The old goblin was, Harry thought, someone who understood the satisfying long game of waiting for the right moment. The scroll detailed 13 separate directives tied to Harry's vaults and magical identity that bore Dumbledore's signature. Educational trust funds redirected. Access restrictions placed. A guardianship notation that tied Harry's physical residence to a blood ward at Privet Drive and ensured his removal from that residence would be legally complicated. A notation from 1991 tying the Sorting Hat's assessment to Dumbledore's standing instructions. And a directive from 1981, dated 3 weeks after the night in Godric's Hollow, authorizing the placement of what the scroll called identity management enchantments in the interest of strategic asset protection. Strategic asset protection. Harry read that phrase twice, the way he'd read the letter that morning. Then he rolled the scroll up and set it on the table with the same careful, deliberate movement he used when he was very angry and very certain. "I'll be taking copies of everything," he said. "Of course." Ragnock gestured to the goblin on his right, who immediately began assembling documents with the crisp efficiency of someone who has prepared for this exact moment. "Mr. Potter. You should be aware that what happened today, the inheritance eruption, the land's response, it will have been felt. Not loudly, not specifically. But wizards sensitive to such things will know that something significant has occurred in magical Britain. The headmaster of Hogwarts is among the most sensitive wizards alive. How long do I have before he can do anything about it? The enchantments are gone. There is nothing to reinstate, the stone itself records their destruction." Ragnock's voice carried a note of professional satisfaction. "There is nothing anyone can do about your inheritance, Mr. Potter. It is registered in Goblin records, witnessed by 5 Goblin officials, and the land itself is your witness. A wizard could no more unmake your claim to the seat of the true ruler than they could unmake gravity." "Good," Harry said. He stood up, and it was only as he straightened fully that Ragnock and the goblins saw what had happened to him physically, because something had. He was the same height, the same black hair and the same chaos, the same green eyes. But there was a quality to the way he stood that hadn't been there when he'd sat down. Not arrogance, nothing so obvious. More like the difference between a river that's been dammed and the same river with the dam removed. Just the natural force of what he actually was, no longer having to be compressed into a smaller space. One of the younger goblins, without seeming to realize it, took a small step back. "I'll need to use one of your private meeting rooms," Harry said. "I have some letters to write before I leave." "The second door on your left," Ragnock said, and there was something in the old goblin's voice, not deference, because goblins didn't really do deference, but a certain professional respect, the kind you gave someone who had just demonstrated they understood the game. "We will send food." "Thank you, Ragnock." Harry paused at the door. "And thank you for waiting for me. I know it wasn't exactly convenient." Ragnock made a sound that might, in a different species, have been a laugh. "We are a bank, Mr. Potter. We are very patient." The private meeting room was small, wood-paneled, and mercifully quiet. There was a writing desk with fresh parchment, a pot of ink that refilled itself, and quills of 3 different weights. Harry sat down, cracked his knuckles, 19 rings making a sound like someone shuffling small coins, and thought for exactly 3 minutes before he started writing. The first letter was to Sirius. Not the dead Sirius, not the one who'd fallen through the veil at the Department of Mysteries 6 weeks ago. Harry had sat with that loss every day since, the way you sit with a broken bone, constantly aware of it, adjusting everything around it. He was writing to the legal status of Sirius Black, because Ragnarok had confirmed that Sirius had never received a trial. No trial meant no conviction. No conviction meant the sentence was illegitimate. And a man who died with an illegitimate sentence deserved to have his name cleared, if nothing else. He wrote to the Wisengamot office, formally, in the language of legal petition. He'd never written a legal letter in his life but found that the right words came with a strange fluency, as though the house seats carried some osmotic familiarity with legal process. He cited the statutes Ragnarok had flagged for him. He used words like herein and pursuant and the undersigned, Lord Harry James Potter, head of House Potter, head of House Black, head of House Peveril, and acting holder of the seat of the true ruler of magical Britain, and if writing that felt slightly surreal, it also felt, in the deepest possible way, completely factually accurate. He signed it with all 19 house names. The scroll was 4 feet long by the time he finished. The second letter was shorter. It was addressed to Albus Percival Wulfric Brian Dumbledore, headmaster of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, supreme mugwump of the International Confederation of Wizards, chief warlock of the Wisengamot. Dear Professor Dumbledore, he wrote. I think we should talk. I'll be in touch. Regards, Harry. He considered it for a moment. Then he added a postscript, the enchantments have been removed. Gringotts has the documentation. I suggest you speak to your solicitor. The third letter was personal and took the longest, and when he'd finished it his hand was a little unsteady, which he allowed himself for the duration of folding the parchment and then let go of entirely. It was addressed to Ron and Hermione both, because they lived in one another's pockets enough that writing to one meant writing to both. It said, something happened today. I'm fine. I'll explain everything when I see you. I'll be at the Burrow by Thursday. Harry. P.S. Don't let anyone tell you it's dangerous. I am coming whether or not it's dangerous. He gave all 3 letters to the goblin courier Ragnarok sent to collect them. The letters disappeared with that efficient goblin promptness that suggested they would arrive exactly when needed. Then Harry sat back in the wood-paneled chair, rested his ringed hands on the desk, and thought about Dumbledore. He'd been thinking about it since Ragnarok had said strategic asset protection with the careful neutrality of someone presenting evidence. He'd been expecting something like this for a while, not the specifics, not the inheritance, but the general shape of it, the sense that his life had been arranged around a function he'd never consented to. The prophecy had been part of it. Being kept at Privet Drive had been part of it. The specific, curated shape of his education, knowing enough, but never quite enough, pushed toward Voldemort at every turn without being given the tools to actually end it on his own terms. He wasn't naive about Dumbledore's motives. The man wasn't cruel. He genuinely believed, Harry was nearly certain of this, that what he'd done had been necessary. Had been the best of the available options. He'd looked at an infant and a prophecy and a war and he'd made calculations the way brilliant men make calculations, the ones that look right on paper and wrong when you're the variable being solved for. But Harry also thought about every year at Hogwarts. Every moment of being told to trust the plan, to be patient, to wait. Every suppression that had kept him from knowing who he was, from having the power that was his by birthright, from being able to walk into that Department of Mysteries with something other than a handful of 6th-year students and sheer bloody-minded stubbornness. He thought about Sirius, who had died because Harry hadn't had the resources or the magical capability or the information to see through a trap a more fully powered wizard would have spotted. He sat with that for a while. Then he stood up, pocketed the copies of all the Gringotts documents, straightened his robes, and walked out into the corridor. Ragnarok was waiting for him in the main chamber, standing with the formal posture of someone who has something important to say and has been composing it. "There is one more thing," the goblin said. "Tell me." "The seat of the true ruler has a physical manifestation. A location." Ragnar gestured, and the amber runes on the walls pulsed once. "There is a chamber beneath the Ministry of Magic, far beneath it, older than the Ministry by centuries, that houses the throne of Concordat. It has been empty for 1100 years. When you are ready to claim it formally, the land itself will announce your seat to every magical creature in Britain. Goblin, elf, centaur, mermaid, witch, wizard. Every sentient magical being on the island will know." "What do you mean, announce?" Ragnar considered the right word with the same care as before. "Feel. They will feel it. The same way you felt the land, just in reverse." He paused. "We thought you should know before that happens, so it does not surprise you." Harry looked at him. "You think I should do it?" "I think," Ragnar said, with the gravity of a 300-year-old banker who has spent decades waiting for this specific conversation, "that Britain's magical community has been without a proper steward for 1100 years, and is in the middle of a war that the current governance is entirely incompetent to handle, and that the throne is yours by birthright, magic, land recognition, and every legal framework we possess." He tilted his head. "What you do with that is, of course, your decision." Harry was quiet for a moment. Outside, he could hear the ordinary sounds of Gringotts, the clink of coins, the distant rumble of carts, someone at a teller window asking about exchange rates. "Not today," he said. "Not until I've talked to my friends and dealt with some things. But soon. We will be ready," Ragnar said, and gave a short bow, the deep kind, not the transaction closing nod that goblins generally offered humans, but the kind that meant something. Harry walked out through the iron door and back into the main hall of Gringotts. The tellers looked up as he passed. He caught two of them staring at his hands, at the rings, their expressions cycling through something he recognized as Goblin Professional Shock, which looked nearly identical to Goblin Professional Neutrality except for a slight widening around the eyes. He pushed through the bronze doors into Diagon Alley. The summer sunshine landed on him like an affirmation. The alley was still quiet, still moving with that head-down wartime caution, but as Harry stood on the steps of Gringotts with 19 rings and a newly opened sky of magic inside his chest, he felt the cobblestones beneath his feet, felt them in the way he had not felt anything since coming back to consciousness on the chamber floor. A deep, old recognition. The land saying yes, there you are, I've been waiting. He stood on the steps for a full minute, just breathing, getting used to the size of himself. Then he turned left and walked toward the leaky cauldron, and two aurors fell into step beside him, and one of them, the younger one, who had been watching the door since Harry went in, said, "Everything all right, sir," with the slightly cautious tone of someone who could feel that something had changed and wasn't sure if they should mention it. "Fine," Harry said. "Actually, fine, properly. Maybe for the first time." He glanced sideways at the auror. "Do you know who I should contact about filing a legal petition to the Wisengamot?" "I've already written it, I just need to know the official submission channel." The auror blinked. Yes, sir, the Department of Magical Law Enforcement's clerking office handles Wisengamot filings. Second floor, Ministry of Magic." "Good," Harry said. "I'll be going to the ministry on Thursday. You're welcome to escort me if the ministry likes." Yes, sir." Harry walked through the leaky cauldron without stopping, out into Muggle London, into the bright blare of a Tuesday morning in summer. A bus went by. Someone was selling newspapers on the corner. The world was entirely unchanged and Harry was entirely different, and for once in his life those two facts sat comfortably beside each other, requiring no resolution. He had things to do. He started making a list. Chapter 2, The Weight of 19 Rings. The Prophet ran it on Wednesday morning. Not the truth, the Prophet hadn't run the truth about anything in 14 months, but something adjacent to it, the kind of story that happens when a journalist has a fragment of fact and wraps it in enough speculation to fill column space. The headline read, "Disturbance at Gringotts, Magical Anomaly Detected, Sources Cite Structural Concerns." The article quoted two unnamed ministry officials who suggested the tremor felt by sensitive witches and wizards across London on Tuesday morning was likely connected to deep vault excavation work, and a Gringotts spokesperson who said, in the clipped and uninformative way of Goblin public communications, that all vaults and assets were secure and that any suggestion of instability was unfounded. Harry read it over breakfast at the bed and breakfast near King's Cross where the order had arranged for him to stay until Thursday. He'd ordered the prophet out of habit rather than expectation, and it delivered its usual ratio of obfuscation to information. The important thing was the headline itself, not what it said, but what it confirmed. The tremor had been felt. Dumbledore would have felt it. The question was what the old man was doing about it. He got his answer at 9:10 in the morning, when his bedroom door knocked, a very deliberate, unhurried knock, the kind with a lot of patience behind it, and he opened it to find not an order member, not an Auror, but Albus Dumbledore himself, standing in the narrow hallway of a Muggle bed and breakfast with his half-moon spectacles and his silver beard and his traveling robes of deep blue, looking for all the world like a grandfather visiting on a pleasant summer errand. Except his eyes, which were doing none of the usual twinkling. "Harry," he said. "May I come in?" "You came to me," Harry said, which wasn't a yes or a no, but he stepped back from the door anyway. Dumbledore came in and looked around the small room with the contained attention of someone cataloguing. He sat in a single armchair without being offered it, not rudely, but with the unconscious ease of a man who generally sat wherever he liked, and folded his hands in his lap. Harry stayed standing. He didn't do it deliberately. He just didn't particularly feel like sitting. "You went to Gringotts yesterday," Dumbledore said. "I did." "I see." The old man looked at Harry's hands. Specifically at the rings. His expression didn't change, exactly, but something behind it went very still, the look of an extremely accomplished chess player watching an opponent make a move that the player didn't know was possible. "How much did they tell you?" "Everything," Harry said. "Including the parts that were about you." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. Outside, a pigeon landed on the window ledge, considered its options, and left. "I see," he said again. "And how are you feeling?" "I'm not angry," Harry said, which was true in the specific way that very cold things aren't hot. "I'm clear." "That's different." Dumbledore looked at him. Really looked at him, the way people sometimes looked at things that had changed while they weren't watching. "The enchantments are gone. Permanently. Gringotts has the documentation." Harry picked up the prophet from the bed, glanced at the headline once more, and set it back down. "I wrote you a letter yesterday. I received it. Did you speak to your solicitor?" A pause. "I thought it would be more productive to speak to you directly." "All right." Harry crossed his arms, comfortable in his own skin in a way that was new enough that he was still getting used to the geography of it. "Then let's speak directly. You put 17 enchantments on me across 15 years. Starting 3 weeks after my parents died. You called it strategic asset protection. I'd like to hear your reasoning, since you're here." Dumbledore was quiet for longer this time. It was a specific kind of quiet, not evasive, not calculating, but the quiet of a man who has had an argument with himself for a very long time and is still not sure which side won. When he spoke, his voice was careful and, Harry thought, genuinely tired. "I made a decision in 1981 that I have revisited many times since," Dumbledore said. "When the killing curse failed, when you survived, I understood very quickly what you were. What you carried. Not just the scar and the prophecy, but the inheritance. The seat. The weight of what would happen if Voldemort, or his followers, or the wrong faction of the Wizengamot understood what they were looking at." He met Harry's eyes. A 16-year-old boy in possession of the seat of the true ruler and the controlling vote of the Wizengamot is the single most valuable political asset in magical Britain. There are people who would have killed for you. Used you. Corrupted everything you might have become. So you suppressed who I was to protect me from people who wanted to use me, Harry said. While using me yourself. Dumbledore absorbed that without flinching, which Harry gave him credit for. That is not an entirely unfair characterization. I know. Harry uncrossed his arms and sat on the edge of the bed, because standing over the conversation was starting to feel theatrical rather than purposeful. I don't think you're evil, Professor. I think you made a decision when I was 15 months old, and then you spent 15 years making smaller decisions to protect the first one, and somewhere in there you stopped asking whether the first decision was actually right. He paused. Sirius died because I went to the Ministry without the tools I should have had. Without the power I should have had. Without the information I should have had. You know that. Dumbledore closed his eyes briefly. Yes. So, the old man said. He opened his eyes. What do you intend to do? Fix things, Harry said simply. Starting with the Wizengamot on Thursday. I've filed a petition about Sirius, about his lack of trial, his wrongful imprisonment. I'm going to get his name cleared even if it's posthumous. He held Dumbledore's gaze. And I intend to take the seats I'm entitled to. All 19 of them. Today I'm formally registering the inheritance with the Wizengamot Records Office, and tomorrow I'm claiming the seats. The will not receive that easily, Dumbledore said. Fudge's position is going to become very difficult very soon, Harry said. I'm not asking for your opinion on that. I'm telling you what I'm doing. He paused, because he wanted to be precise. I'm not doing this to punish you. What you did was wrong, and there are going to be consequences for it because there have to be, people need to know the truth, but I'm not going to burn down what's useful just to make a point. He looked at the old man steadily. You're a brilliant strategist. You know Voldemort better than almost anyone alive. I still want that. What I don't want is the arrangement where I'm the piece you move. Dumbledore was quiet for a very long moment. The pigeon came back to the window ledge, reconsidered, left again. You are, the old man said finally, and there was something in his voice that Harry couldn't quite categorize, not pride, not grief, something sitting uncomfortably between them, considerably more than I allowed you to be. Yes, Harry said. I am. Dumbledore stood. He moved to the door and then paused, his hand on the frame, and looked back. The throne of Concordat, he said quietly. You know about it. Ragnarok told me. When you claim it, and I believe you will, quite soon, there will be no way to contain the response. Every faction will move at once. Voldemort will understand immediately that the dynamic has changed, and he will act. His eyes were very serious. Be ready for that. I am ready for that, Harry said. I've been ready for that my whole life. I just didn't know it. Dumbledore left. Harry listened to the quiet of the room for a moment after the door clicked shut, then pulled on his jacket, picked up the briefcase-sized folder of Gringotts documents, and went to catch the tube to the Ministry. The Wizengamot Records Office was on the 4th floor of the Ministry, tucked between the Department of Magical Accidents and Catastrophes and a lift that smelled permanently of something that had been accidentally transfigured and never fully recovered. It was staffed by a witch named Madame Ogden, a different Ogden from the Fire Whiskey family, she was quick to mention, who had been working in the records office since before Harry was born and had developed the professional composure of someone who had seen every kind of legal claim and filing and had been surprised by almost none of them. She was surprised by Harry. Not visibly, she maintained her professional composure with great discipline, but Harry saw the precise moment when she read the name block on his filing and her quill stopped moving for exactly 2 seconds longer than normal before she continued. House Potter, she said. House Black. House Peverell. She turned a page. House Gryffindor. Another page. House Slytherin. She looked up. Mr. Potter, the House of Slytherin claim is, by conquest, Harry said. The documentation is in Section 4 of the attached Gringotts file. The precedent is Magical Governance Act of 903 AD, the Conquest Clause, which has never been repealed because no one ever thought it would need to be. He smiled, not unkindly. I know it's a lot. I'd suggest a cup of tea when you get to the bit about the seat of the true ruler. Madame Ogden looked at him for a long moment, then looked at the documents, then back at him. Is there anything else? He passed her the 4-foot petition scroll regarding Sirius Black. She made a small, controlled sound and poured herself a cup of tea that had apparently been waiting for exactly this kind of morning. By the time Harry left the records office, 2 hours later, every claim had been formally lodged, time-stamped, and assigned a case reference number. The files had been copied in triplicate, one for the records office, one for the Wisengamot clerk, one for Harry, and Madame Ogden had confirmed, in the careful language of a woman who chose her words the way other people chose their battles, that the formal session to acknowledge the seats would be arranged for Friday at 9 o'clock. Harry thanked her and left. He was in the lift going back up when the level 2 door opened and he found himself sharing a car with Cornelius Fudge. The Minister for Magic was wearing lime green robes and carrying a leather-bound folder and had clearly been having the kind of day that comes when reality persists in being inconsistent with the version of it you've publicly endorsed. He looked at Harry with the expression of a man who has long since run out of convenient ways to process what he was looking at. Potter, he said. Minister, Harry said pleasantly. Fudge's eyes went to Harry's hands. The rings. He stared at them the way you stare at something you recognize as significant but whose significance you can't yet compute. What, is that, are those, hereditary house rings, Harry said. Newly registered this morning with the records office. All 19 of them. He watched Fudge process this with the heavy, labored gear-turning of a man whose political instincts were telling him something was wrong but couldn't specify what. There's a formal session on Friday to acknowledge the seats. I imagine the clerk will be sending notifications today. 19, Fudge started. You can't simply, the Wisengamot doesn't just, it does, actually, Harry said. When the seats are legitimate, properly documented, and registered with Gringotts as primary record keeper. It does precisely that. The lift stopped at the atrium. The doors opened. Harry stepped out. Good day, Minister. I'm sure we'll speak more on Friday. He walked out through the golden atrium, past the Fountain of Magical Brethren, and didn't look back at the lift doors. The borough on Thursday afternoon was what it always was, controlled chaos with excellent food and the ongoing, warm impression of a house that had been built by optimism and extension charms and had never quite recovered from either. Harry arrived by port key from the Leaky Cauldron, an arrangement the order had made, though he privately noted that arranging his own port keys was now very straightforwardly within his capabilities, and landed in the garden with the mildly undignified stumble that port key travel always imposed, regardless of the traveler's bloodlines. Hermione was waiting. She was standing at the garden gate with the expression she wore when she had information she'd been holding for longer than was comfortable, which was the expression she'd been wearing since Harry's letter had arrived on Tuesday evening. She let him straighten up from the landing, took in the rings in one comprehensive visual sweep, and then said, "Okay. Inside. Now. I need to hear all of it. Hello to you too. Hello. Inside. Now. Ron's all ready, Ron, he's here." This last directed over her shoulder toward the house. Ron appeared in the kitchen doorway and made his way down the garden path at a pace that managed to be fast while maintaining the studied casualness of someone who had decided to be calm about things. He looked at Harry. Looked at his hands. Looked back at his face. "Mate," Ron said. "What in the actual, are those all?" "Yes," Harry said. 19. "Can we go inside? I'll explain everything." They sat around the Weasley kitchen table, Hermione, Ron, and Harry, with Mrs. Weasley deliberately finding reasons to be in the garden for the duration, a kindness Harry appreciated more than he said. He told them everything. From the letter to the chamber to the basin to Ragnarok's careful enumeration. The suppression enchantments. The dates. The signatures. He put Gringotts' documents on the table and let Hermione read them, she read quickly and with the focused intensity of someone absorbing every implication in real time, while he talked Ron through the verbal version. Ron listened in silence, which was unusual enough that Harry clocked it as significant. He was watching Ron's face while he talked, the way you watch a friend's face when you know the thing you're saying is going to hit something personal, and he could see the specific moment it landed, when Harry mentioned Dumbledore's involvement, specifically the directive about the Sorting Hat, the one that had been tied to Hogwarts wards and had been running continuously since their first year. Ron looked down at the table. So, he said, slowly. Every year. Everything we went through. The Philosopher's Stone. The Chamber. The tournament. He swallowed. He knew what you should have been able to do, and he kept the lid on it. Yes. Ron was quiet. Sirius would be alive. Probably, Harry said. If I'd had even a fraction of what was suppressed, I would have seen through Voldemort's planted vision. I had the pieces. I didn't have the magical sensitivity to read them. Ron pushed back from the table and walked to the kitchen window and stood there with his back to them for a moment, looking out at the garden where his mother was doing something careful and unnecessary to a gnome-free flower bed. When he turned back his jaw was set in a way Harry recognized, the stubborn, committed Weasley expression that meant his mind was made up about something. Right, he said. So what are we doing? Wizengamot session, Friday morning, Harry said. I need to claim the seats formally. We'll be there, Hermione said immediately. She'd put down the documents and was looking at Harry with an expression that was harder to read, not just the analytical focus but something warmer beneath it, and something that might have been a little angry on his behalf, and something else he'd need to examine later when he had more processing space. Harry, the seat of the true ruler, have you looked up the historical precedents? Because the last time it was claimed, Morgan Le Fay used it to, I know. Ragnarok briefed me on the broad strokes. I'm going to need your help with the detailed research. Hermione's eyes lit up in the specific way they did when someone gave her a legitimate research crisis. I've already started, she said, and produced a folder from the bag on the chair beside her, which Harry had assumed was schoolbooks but turned out to be 3 days of Ministry Library notes, 2 Goblin history monographs she'd apparently had all delivered since Tuesday, and a handwritten timeline going back to 700 AD. Ron looked at the folder. Looked at Hermione. When did you even have time? Tuesday night. I didn't sleep much. She was already spreading papers across the table, animated and certain in the way she only got when working on something that genuinely mattered. Okay. So the key thing about the seat is that it doesn't function like ministry authority or even Wizengamot authority. It's not appointed, it's not elected, and it can't be revoked by political process. The land granted it. The land validates it. Morgan Le Fay, Hermione, Harry said, and she stopped. Before we go through all of this, thank you. She looked at him. For what? For not asking me if I'm sure. For not suggesting I should be careful. For not telling me this is a lot of power for one person. Hermione was quiet for a moment. Then she said, with the directness she reserved for important things, it is a lot of power for one person. But it's yours, and you didn't get it by taking it from someone else, and you've spent 5 years being systematically denied it by someone who decided what you were allowed to be. She met his eyes. The question isn't whether you have too much power. The question is what you do with it. And I've known you long enough to know the answer to that. Ron dropped back into his chair and reached for a biscuit from the plate Mrs. Weasley had left. Right, he said again. So. Friday. Ministry. How do we dress for claiming 19 house seats and a magical throne that's been empty for 1,000 years? Not formal robes, Harry said immediately. I'm not going in looking like I'm performing something. I'm going in looking like I belong there. Clean trainers. Ron suggested. Probably not trainers. Dark dress robes, Hermione said. Simple. No house colors, you hold all the houses, you don't champion one of them. The rings will speak for themselves. She looked at his hands again. Actually, the rings will probably say everything before you even open your mouth. Harry turned the Potter signet on his right thumb. It caught the afternoon light from the burrow's windows and threw a small amber reflection onto the kitchen table. "There's one more thing," he said. "Something Ragnarok told me about the throne of Concordat." He explained. The chamber beneath the ministry. The formal claiming. The announcement that would ripple through every magical creature on the island. Ron put down his biscuit. Hermione stopped shuffling papers. "Every magical being," she said carefully. "Simultaneously." That's what he said. She thought about it. "Voldemort will know." "Yes. That's not a deterrent for you," she said, reading his face. "It tells him the game has changed. That's useful information, actually. Right now he thinks he understands what he's fighting. He doesn't." Harry looked between them both. He planned for a suppressed boy with a hero complex and a wand he can't kill. He didn't plan for the actual heir of 19 ancient houses with a claim over the foundational wards of every major magical site in Britain. Ron let out a long breath. "When do you do the throne thing?" "After the Wisengamot session. Friday afternoon, if the session goes the way I expect it to." "How do you expect it to go?" Harry picked up the last biscuit from the plate. "I expect it to go exactly the way it needs to go," he said, which wasn't an answer and was entirely an answer. Friday morning arrived with the kind of early summer light that made London look temporarily like it had its act together. Harry arrived at the ministry at 8:45, walked through security, the wand weighing which stared at his wand reading with the expression of someone whose calibration machine might need recalibrating, and took the lift to the 10th floor where the Wisengamot chambers lived. Hermione and Ron were with him. Neville had sent an owl on Thursday evening saying he'd heard something was happening and could he come, and Harry had written back one word, yes, and found Neville waiting in the lobby when they arrived, wearing neat dark robes and the expression of someone who had made a decision and was calm about it. They shook hands, and Harry was aware, in the way he'd been increasingly aware of things since Tuesday, that Neville's magical signature had a weight to it, had always had a weight to it, that Harry had never been able to properly perceive until now. "You know about the throne?" Harry asked quietly as they walked the corridor toward the chamber doors. "Read it in the Prophet this morning." "Well, the Prophet didn't say that exactly, they said unspecified ministry event, but I could read between the lines." Neville glanced sideways. "I'm with you. Whatever you need." "I know," Harry said. "I've always known that." Neville absorbed this with the quiet dignity of someone who had needed to hear it and was not going to make a production of having needed it. The Wisengamot chamber was a high-ceilinged oval room with tiered seating in graduated circles, currently occupied by about 60 witches and wizards in plum-colored robes with a W embroidered on the chest. The empty seats, the ones that hadn't been claimed in decades, the ones belonging to dormant or extinct houses, were marked with small brass plaques on their seat backs. There were 19 of them scattered through the tiers, and every single one of them had Harry's name on it, because Madame Ogden had been both thorough and, Harry suspected, a little gleeful in the execution of her job. The current occupants of the chamber were arranged in the particular formation of people pretending to have conversations while actually watching the door. Harry came through it and felt the room's attention land on him like a physical weight, 60 pairs of eyes doing the rapid scan-in process, the black hair, the scar, the age, the rings. Several people who had been in conversation stopped mid-word. Fudge was in the minister's seat at the front, looking as though he'd had a thoroughly unpleasant night and morning and was bracing for a worse afternoon. Beside him, the chief warlock's seat, normally Dumbledore's, but Dumbledore had not arrived yet, was conspicuously empty. Harry walked to the front of the chamber. He didn't take a seat, not yet, because this was the formal claiming, and the protocol, which Hermione had made him read twice on Thursday night, required the claimant to stand at the floor of the chamber for the acknowledgement. He stood at the floor. The room got even quieter, which was a difficult achievement. Fudge cleared his throat. "This session is called to formally acknowledge the inheritance claims submitted to the Wisengamot Records Office on Wednesday the 12th of July, filed by one, he looked at his notes with the expression of a man reading a list that makes him feel physically unwell. Mr. Harry James Potter, regarding the following houses. He read the list. All 19 names. The chamber got progressively more still with each one, until by the time he got to and the seat of the true ruler of magical Britain it was the kind of silence that has its own texture. Dumbledore came through the doors just as Fudge finished reading. He moved to the chief warlock's seat without comment, settled into it, and looked at Harry. Harry looked back. There was nothing adversarial in it, they had said what needed saying on Wednesday morning, but there was a weight to the look, an acknowledgement of the reconfigured geometry between them. The documentation has been reviewed by 3 independent Gringotts solicitors, Madame Ogden said from her desk at the side of the chamber, reading from her own notes with the professional composure of someone who has had 2 days to adjust to this and is managing. All 19 claims have been validated as legitimate under wizarding law, goblin inheritance law, and the ancient magical compacts. The seat of the true ruler claim is additionally validated by the Goblin Land Record, which carries the signature of Britain's foundational ward structures. She looked up. For the acknowledgement to be formal and binding, the chief warlock must ask if there is any legal challenge to the claims. If none is raised within 3 minutes, the claims are accepted by right and the seats are registered permanently. Dumbledore looked out at the chamber. Are there any legal challenges to the inheritance claims of Lord Harry James Potter? The silence stretched. One member, Lucius Malfoy, who was here because he was technically still a member pending the outcome of several investigations that had been mysteriously slow-moving, had opened his mouth. Harry looked at him. Not threateningly. Not with any visible power or magical pressure. He simply looked at him, the way someone looks at a door they've already decided they'll open if necessary. Malfoy closed his mouth. The 3 minutes passed. No challenges having been raised, Madame Ogden said, and the relief in her professional voice was almost audible, the claims are accepted. Lord Harry James Potter is formally acknowledged as holder of the following hereditary seats. She read them again. As each name was read, the brass plaque on the corresponding seat lit briefly gold and then settled. When all 19 had been read, the 19 seats in the tiered room were glowing softly, and Harry could feel them, could feel each one as a distinct thread, the way you feel individual fingers on a hand, connected and separate at once. You may take a seat, Lord Potter, Dumbledore said, and there was something in the way he said it, the formal address, the permission, and beneath both of those the acknowledgement of what had happened and what was coming, that closed something out and opened something else. Harry chose the seat that the ancient records identified as belonging to the seat of the true ruler's proxy position in the Wizengamot, a seat in the highest tier, center of the curve, that had been collecting dust behind a brass plaque that read "I in abeyance" for 11 centuries. He sat in it. The glow deepened briefly when he made contact with the seat, and around the chamber, 16 of the remaining occupied seats also glowed, those belonging to houses in historic fealty to the ancient compact, briefly, automatically, like lights responding to a circuit being completed. Several members looked down at their seats in visible alarm. Harry didn't smile. He rested his hands on the arms of the chair, the rings catching the overhead lights, and looked out at the chamber with the patient attention of someone who has a great deal to do and is getting started. Fudge was staring at him from the minister's position. Now, the minister said, in the strained voice of a man trying to reassert procedural control, the session can move on to regular. I have items to raise, Harry said. His voice in the chamber was clear and entirely level. Fudge blinked. Lord Potter, the session protocol, allows any seated member to raise items at an acknowledgement session, yes. Harry reached into his robes and produced a folded document. He unfolded it and did not consult it, he'd memorized it. I'd like to raise 3. Fudge looked at Dumbledore. Dumbledore looked at Harry with the expression of a man watching someone play chess and recognizing the opening. He gave a small, precise nod. The floor recognizes Lord Potter, Dumbledore said. Harry stood. The first item concerns Sirius Orion Black, who died on the 18th of June 1996 without ever having received a trial for the crimes for which he was imprisoned. The Wisingamott's own records confirm no trial date was ever set, which means no conviction was ever lawfully recorded, which means his imprisonment and the subsequent destruction of his civil standing were extrajudicial acts. I'm moving that his name be cleared posthumously, his status as wrongfully imprisoned be formally acknowledged, and that the full record of this failure be entered into the Wisingamott's public register. The chamber erupted. Harry waited it out. He had considerable practice at waiting out rooms. Dumbledore called order with his wand and the chamber quieted. A vote, he said, and his voice was entirely neutral, will be called. The vote was 43 to 17 in favor. It would have been closer without Harry's voting block, which at 19 houses represented a controlling interest, about a third of the total Wisingamot voting weight. Harry was aware of the calculations running behind several sets of eyes in the room and felt no particular need to pretend they weren't. The second item, Harry said, while the room was still processing the first, concerns the continued detention in Azkaban of 11 individuals convicted of Death Eater activity during the period 1979 to 1981, whose trial records show evidence of Veritaserum-based confessions obtained under duress, in direct violation of the Wisingamot's own evidence statutes. He produced a second document. I'm moving for a formal review committee to be established within 30 days, with authority to order retrials. This time the eruption was louder, and more specifically directed at Harry. Several members were on their feet. Fudge was making gestures that suggested he felt the situation was escaping him, which it was. One member, a heavyset whose name Harry knew from the roster as Umbridge's predecessor on the improper use of magic committee, said, loudly, on what authority does this boy think he can? On the authority of 19 hereditary seats and the seat of the true ruler, Harry said, without raising his voice, which collectively represent a controlling voting bloc and the right of veto over any Wisingamot legislation that contravenes foundational magical law. The authority is documented. It is registered. It is ancient. And it is, under the magical compact this government was built to honor, non-negotiable. The chamber was very quiet again. A vote, Dumbledore said, and his voice was something Harry hadn't heard from him before, stripped of strategy, just tired and honest. Will be called. 38 to 22. The third item, Harry said, concerns the dissemination of false information by the Ministry of Magic regarding the return of Voldemort. He used the name clearly and without decoration, and half the chamber flinched. Specifically, the minister's documented direction to the Daily Prophet to characterize witness testimony regarding Voldemort's return as fraudulent, resulting in a 14-month delay in defensive preparation that has cost lives. I'm moving that a formal inquiry be established, that the minister be required to provide testimony, and that the inquiry's findings be published in full. The silence that followed this was the deepest one yet. Fudge had gone a color that didn't have a clean name. He was on his feet. This is, you cannot, there is absolutely no precedent for a sitting minister to be called before a Wisingamot inquiry on the say-so of, there are 4 precedents, Harry said. All ancient, all technically still on the books, none repealed. The most recent was 1356. Hermione. He didn't look around, but he heard her at the gallery railing find the right page in her folder and hold it up. Madame Ogden, across the chamber, craned to look at the document. Then she looked at her own records. Then she looked at Harry with the expression of a woman who was going to need a great deal more tea. The precedent is valid, she said carefully. A vote, Dumbledore said, for the third time, and the exhaustion in his voice was now indistinguishable from something that might have been relief. 31 to 29. Closest of the 3. But a majority. The session closed 40 minutes later, with 3 motions passed, one minister's day thoroughly ruined, and Harry's 19 seats formally, permanently, irrevocably registered in the Wisingamot's record. As the members filed out, several stopping at a cautious distance to introduce themselves, others moving quickly with the hunched purpose of people with urgent float calls to make, Dumbledore came down from the chief warlock seat and stood before Harry. The throne? He asked. This afternoon, Harry said. The old man nodded once. He looked, Harry thought, genuinely tired, not politically, not strategically, just old in the way that very old people sometimes suddenly became visible as old, when you stopped looking at the mind and saw the person carrying it. "Will you need anything?" Harry considered this honest question with the care it deserved. "Someone who knows where the chamber is." "I know where it is," Dumbledore said quietly. "I've known for 70 years and never told anyone." He paused. "I'll take you there." Harry looked at him for a moment. Then he said, "All right." They walked out of the chamber together, down a ministry corridor that smelled of old parchment and institutional carpet, and somewhere between the door and the lift Harry felt the land beneath the ministry's foundations register the direction of their steps and begin, quietly, like a held breath before a note, to wait. Chapter 3, Letters Written in Fire. The chamber beneath the ministry was not on any map. It was below the Department of Mysteries, below the corridors Harry had run through in June with his blood up and his mind full of Sirius, below the polished floors and the whispering doors and the room full of brains. Dumbledore led him through the Department of Mysteries with a quiet nod to the unspeakables on duty. They parted for him with the practiced deference of people who had learned not to ask, and to a door at the very back of the circular room that Harry had never noticed. It was set flush with the wall, smooth black stone with no handle and no keyhole, and it had been invisible until Harry was within arm's reach of it. The door opened when he put his hand on it. Not with magic, not with a spoken password. Just his hand on the stone and the door swinging inward, as though it had been waiting to be asked. "I tried to open that door once," Dumbledore said, behind him, in 1947. 3 times, in fact, over several years. It never moved. Harry didn't say anything. He stepped through. The stairs beyond were carved from the same black stone as the door, worn smooth in the center by feet that had last climbed them 1100 years ago. The torches on the walls, not the green flame goblin variety, but something older, a steady blue-white, lit themselves as Harry descended, advancing ahead of him down the stairs, and went dark behind him. Dumbledore followed, and the torches lit for him too, but less eagerly. The chamber at the bottom was larger than Harry expected. The ceiling vaulted upward into darkness, and the walls were covered in the same amber runes he'd seen in Gringotts, though these were larger, deeper carved, more weathered. In the center of the chamber was the throne. It was not elaborate. That was the first thing Harry registered. He'd half expected something spectacular, something draped in legend, and instead it was a chair of black stone that had the same worn quality as the stairs, the same sense of age that had become comfortable with itself. No jewels, no gilt. Just the stone, and above the seat back, carved into the rock, the outline of Britain, not the modern coastline exactly, but recognizably the island, the shape of it, worn and true. He walked toward it and the ambient temperature of the chamber shifted, just slightly, the way a room changes when someone who belongs in it finally arrives. He sat down. What happened next was not dramatic. There was no explosion of light, no earthquake, no celestial announcement. There was a sound, deep, resonant, felt more in the chest than heard with the ears, like the lowest note of a very large bell, struck once and then spreading outward in rings, the way a stone dropped in still water spreads, except that the rings kept going, through the stone walls, through the bedrock, out under the ministry and under London and under all of Britain, under the Channel and somehow not beyond, as though the island itself were the boundary of the sound. Harry felt it leave him, or leave through him, the announcement, the registration. The land declaring itself to every magical creature on the island, the way Ragnarok had described. Not loud, not violent. Just, known. The way sunrise is known. The way the change of a season is known. Something simply true, suddenly present. He sat in the throne for exactly 2 minutes. Then he stood up, feeling the stone's reluctance to let him go, not possessively, but the way of fire is reluctant when you move away from it, and turned back toward the stairs. Dumbledore was standing very still, with his eyes closed and his head slightly bowed. When Harry moved, the old man opened his eyes, and they were, Harry thought, rather wet, though Dumbledore's expression didn't acknowledge this and so Harry didn't either. "Well," Harry said. "Yes," said Dumbledore. Quite. They climbed back up in silence, and the blue-white torches followed them up. The responses started arriving before Harry had left the ministry building. The first was a Patronus, a silver horse, full gallop, that appeared in the atrium while Harry was crossing it toward the exit. It resolved into a message from Kingsley Shacklebolt, whose voice came out of the silver horse's mouth calm as weather. I felt it. I'm with you. Tell me what you need. The second was a formal letter that appeared, quite literally from nowhere, in Harry's inside pocket, not owl-delivered, not hand-carried, simply there, as though it had decided to exist in that location. He pulled it out. The wax seal showed a serpent eating its own tail, the Ouroboros, used by several continental wizarding families, and the parchment was midnight blue. He opened it in the ministry corridor with Hermione reading over his shoulder before he'd finished unfolding it. Lord Potter, it read, we represent the International Confederation of Wizards Eastern European Accord. We have been aware of your suppressed status for 6 years and have been waiting with considerable patience for this morning. We would very much like to discuss mutual interests at your earliest convenience. Please be assured of our complete support for the coming conflict. With great respect, and a list of 7 names followed, none of which Harry knew but all of which Hermione clearly did, because she made a sound that was almost inaudible but definitely impressed. The Eastern European Accord, she said. Harry, they're one of the most powerful independent magical alliances in the world. They haven't formally allied with any British faction in 200 years. They're allying now, Harry said, and folded the letter and put it back in his pocket. Neville, who had been walking beside them since the Wisengamot session, said, there's going to be a lot of these, isn't there? Yes, Harry said. Ron, I need you to get a notebook. Ron, on Harry's other side, looked at him. A notebook. Something to track correspondence in. This is going to get complicated fast and I'm not losing letters in Robe's pockets. Ron considered this. A notebook, he repeated, and there was something in his voice that was half incredulous and half fond. The man's just claimed a 1,000-year-old magical throne and his primary concern is stationery. His primary concern, Hermione corrected, is organization, which is frankly reassuring. They took the flue back to the burrow from the ministry atrium, and by the time Harry landed in the Weasley kitchen and dusted ash from his robes, 2 more letters had arrived by owl and 1 had been waiting on the table, which Mrs. Weasley confirmed had appeared from nowhere about 8 minutes ago, and she'd made tea and tried not to read it, which Harry believed because the tea was very good and the letter was still sealed. He sat at the table and opened everything methodically. By 7 that evening he had 31 letters. He spread them on the kitchen table in categories, which was Hermione's suggestion and a good one. Hermione had a quill and was making notes while Harry read, occasionally asking questions that he answered without looking up from whatever he was reading, and Ron was doing the notebook thing, an actual notebook, procured from somewhere in the house, spiral-bound with a cartoon of a quaffle on the cover, which Harry privately thought was perfect, recording names and affiliations and the quick one-line summaries Harry gave for each letter. International support, Harry said, passing 3 letters to the left pile. Continental neutral families, all offering recognition. Gringotts, that's a second formal letter from Ragnarok, confirming the throne claiming registered in their records and offering a term sheet for a formal alliance between my office and Goblin governance. That goes in the priority pile. You have an office? Ron said. Apparently I do now. Ragnarok's letter references, the office of the seat of the true ruler, like it already exists. Harry turned the letter over. There was a footnote in smaller script at the bottom, we took the liberty of preparing the physical space. Second sublevel of Gringotts. It has a very good desk. The goblins move fast when they're motivated. Right, said Ron, and wrote, office, Gringotts sublevel. Nice desk. Hostile, Harry continued, setting 2 letters to the right pile. One from Umbridge, which I'm going to pretend I didn't receive for exactly 48 hours while I decide how to handle her, and one from someone signing himself Lord Avery, who is apparently a Death Eater whose current investigation has been stalled for 18 months and who would like me to know, in politely venomous terms, that my Wisengamot votes were an overreach. Harry set it aside. Save that one. I'll want to come back to it. Hermione was frowning at the pile. You said you wanted to write to Narcissa Malfoy. Yes. He picked up a blank sheet of parchment. Tonight. Hermione and Ron exchanged a look. Harry saw it. Say it. Narcissa Malfoy, Ron said carefully, whose husband is a Death Eater, whose house has been a known Voldemort stronghold since the First War, and who is one of the most intelligent witches alive, Harry said, who does not want her son to die in a war she never chose, and who is currently trapped in a position that is going to get someone she loves killed unless someone offers her a different position. He picked up the quill. She has information I need and leverage I can use, and I think she's been waiting for exactly the right offer for approximately a year. The throne claiming today will have told her the game has changed. The question is whether I'm the first person to reach her or the second. He wrote the letter. It was short. 3 paragraphs. The first established who he was and what he was offering, not protection, because that was patronizing, but recognition, her value as a source of intelligence and her status as someone who had made her choices under duress rather than conviction. The second outlined what he needed, information about Voldemort's current base, his plans for the immediate future, and specifically what he knew about the seat of the true ruler and how he intended to respond to it. The third paragraph was the most important one, and Harry wrote it carefully. I am not Dumbledore, he wrote. I am not asking you to spy. I am asking you to decide which side of this war you want your family to be standing on when it ends, and I am offering you a way to get there. The offer is genuine. The protection is real. And for what it is worth, I know the difference between someone who chose evil and someone who was cornered into it. You were cornered. That matters to me. He sealed it with the Potter signet ring, then added the black ring impression as a second seal, a deliberate choice, because Narcissa would know what the Black House seal meant and it would signal that this was family business as much as political. He gave it to Hermione's owl, which was the fastest of the available birds, with instructions to deliver it to hand only. Now, he said, I need to write to the centaurs. Ron blinked. The centaurs. And the Mere People. And the house elves, not through normal channels, I'll need to think about how to reach them properly. And the giants, eventually, though that's going to need groundwork first. Harry picked up another sheet of parchment. The seat of the true ruler's compact is with all magical creatures, not just wizards. Most of them have been frozen out of British magical governance for centuries. They felt the throne claiming today. If I don't reach out to them before Voldemort does, I've wasted the advantage. Hermione had gone still in the way she went still when an idea landed that she needed a moment to process fully. You're rebuilding the compact, she said. Not just the wizard side. The whole original compact. Every party to the original agreement. Yes. Harry. Her voice had changed, not alarmed, but fully, genuinely awed, which from Hermione was rarer and more valuable than it would have been from almost anyone else. If you can actually do that, if you can bring the magical creatures into formal alliance under the seat, the war changes completely. Voldemort's power base is almost entirely human wizard supremacist. If you have the centaurs, the Mere People, the giants, the goblins, Harry added. Already moving on that. Ragnar's term sheet is very reasonable. The house elves, she continued, and her voice had taken on the particular quality of someone building a mental architecture in real time. They're everywhere. Every major wizarding household, every institution, Hogwarts, the Ministry. They've been treated as property for centuries and they have enormous, almost entirely untapped magical power. If they were formal parties to the compact, they'd have legal status, Harry said. They'd have legal status, Hermione said, and the words landed in the kitchen with the specific weight of something that had been needed for a very long time. Her eyes were bright. We'd need to draft a charter. I know. That's your project, if you want it. She put down her quill and picked up a fresh one and said, I want it, and started writing immediately, without any further discussion, because that was Hermione Granger, and Harry had been counting on exactly that. At 9:30, when the letters were sorted and the first drafts of the Centaur correspondence were done, and Ron had filled 12 pages of the Quaffle notebook and was making alarming faces at the entry for the Eastern European Accord, Neville said, from where he'd been sitting quietly at the table's far end for the past hour, reading through the historical documents Hermione had brought, "Can I ask you something?" "Yes," Harry said. Neville set down the document he was reading. It was the Goblin account of the original compact's construction, the one Hermione had flagged as the most important primary source. He'd been going through it methodically, which Harry had noticed and appreciated without comment. "The prophecy," Neville said. "The one in the Hall of Prophecy." The table went quiet. Hermione stopped writing. Ron's quill paused in the notebook. "You know about it," Harry said. "Dumbledore told me. Last year, privately. He said I had a right to know, that it could have been me. That the wording was ambiguous enough that Voldemort's choice was what made it about you rather than me." Neville looked at Harry directly. "I've been thinking about that ever since." "About what that means?" "About what you carry." Harry looked back at him steadily. And I think you've been carrying it mostly alone," Neville said, "because you were suppressed and kept small enough that there wasn't room for anyone else to share the weight. But there's room now." He held Harry's gaze. "I'm not offering out of guilt, or because I feel like I owe you for the fact that it wasn't me. I'm offering because you're my friend and you're about to go to war and I am very good at herbology, which sounds stupid, but I'm also very good at fighting when I need to be, and I'm better than anyone in our year except possibly you and Hermione at defensive magic, and I want in." "Formally." Harry was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "What do you mean, formally?" Neville pulled a book from somewhere, he'd been carrying it under the table, Harry realized, and set it on the table. It was old, bound in dark green leather, with the Longbottom House sigil embossed on the cover. "My grandmother found this in the family vault when she heard about the throne claiming. She says it's the original Longbottom pledge of fealty to the seat of the true ruler, signed in 1003 AD. He opened it to the last page, where there was a sigil and a signature in faded brown ink. She says it's still binding, and she's re-signed it. And she'd like me to do the same." Harry looked at the book. Looked at Neville. Thought about this boy who'd come to Hogwarts unable to do a simple Wingardium Leviosa, who'd faced his boggart and his grandmother's expectations and the weight of a prophecy that could have named him, and who'd shown up every single time it mattered, without fail, with or without being asked. "You don't have to swear fealty," Harry said. "I don't want, this isn't a court. I'm not building something that requires people to bow." "I know," Neville said patiently. "That's why I want to sign it." He pushed the book toward Harry. "The pledge is about the compact, not about you personally. It says, I had Hermione translate it, it says that the signer commits to the protection and honest functioning of the compact between the land and its magical people. That's what I'm signing. The fact that you're the seed is, incidental." Harry looked at Hermione, who gave him a very specific look that said he is, technically speaking, correct, and also let him do this, Harry. Harry reached across and picked up Neville's quill and signed his own name in the book, beside the fresh signature of Augusta Longbottom. The page glowed very briefly amber and settled. Neville picked up the quill and signed his own. Ron watched this, and then, in the silence that followed, said carefully, Is there a Weasley version of this book?" The question hung in the kitchen with a slightly different weight than Neville's had, because there was something in Ron's voice, a tension Harry recognized, because he'd been half waiting for it since the kitchen table on Thursday. Ron was not by nature a follower, and he'd spent 5 years being Harry's best friend and good at things that were less visible than the things Harry was good at, and Harry had thought carefully about what that meant now that the gap between them was no longer measured in talent or reputation but in something considerably more structurally fundamental. "The Weasley family," Harry said, "doesn't need to pledge fealty to the seat. The Weasley family has been the most consistent and reliable allies I have and has given more to the cause of fighting dark wizards than almost any other house in Britain, and what I need from you is exactly what you've always been, someone who tells me when I'm wrong, who notices things I miss, who has my back in a fight and is honest with me when honesty is inconvenient. He looked at Ron directly. That's not fealty. That's friendship. And it's more valuable. Ron was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "All right," and picked up the Quaffle notebook again, and that was that. The response from Narcissa Malfoy arrived the following morning. Harry was at the Burrow kitchen table at 6 o'clock, he'd been up since 5, reading through the Goblin terms sheet and making notes, when Hermione's owl came back with a letter that was considerably heavier than the one that had been sent. The parchment was cream, the hand was precise and elegant, and the Malfoy seal had been pressed in silver wax, not the usual green. Silver, Harry noted. Not the colors of House Allegiance. A neutral signal. A deliberate choice. He read it once, quickly, and then again slowly. Lord Potter, Narcissa wrote, and the formal address was not cold, it was precise, a woman setting the register of the conversation consciously. Your letter was unexpected. I will not insult you by pretending it was unwelcome. I have 3 conditions. First, Draco must be formally removed from whatever plans the Dark Lord has for him. I don't need you to make him safe, I need you to make him legally and politically useless to Voldemort, which you can do by publicly registering him as under the protection of the seat. This is not sentiment. It is strategy. A Malfoy who is visibly under your protection becomes a liability to Voldemort rather than an asset, and Voldemort does not keep liabilities. Second, Lucius is beyond saving and I have known this for some time. I am not asking you to spare him. I am asking you to ensure that his crimes are adjudicated by law rather than disposed of by war, because the difference matters and because my son has to live in a world after this one. Third, I want a conversation. In person. Not here, the house is watched, by both sides. You choose the location. In return, I will tell you everything I know. Not selected pieces. Everything. The location of the current base, the number of active followers, the plans for the next 3 weeks, and, this is the thing your mentor never knew because he was not in the room when it was said, what Voldemort knows about the seat of the true ruler and what he intends to do about it. He has a counter-move. It is significant. You should know it before he makes it. Sincerely, N.M. Harry set the letter down. He looked at the window, at the early morning Burrow garden going golden in the first sun, at the gnomes doing their habitual gnome activities in the vegetable patch. Well, said Hermione, who had appeared in the doorway in her dressing gown at some point and was clearly trying to give the impression she hadn't been listening from the stairs. She has conditions. They're all reasonable. Harry picked up the letter again. She says Voldemort has a counter-move for the seat. Something planned. He looked at Hermione. Wake Neville. And get Ron. I need to think out loud and I need people who'll argue with me. 15 minutes later they were all at the table, Hermione and Neville reading the letter in turn, Ron listening to Harry's verbal summary with the increasingly alert expression of someone whose tiredness is being defeated by the quality of the information. The throne chamber, Neville said, setting the letter down. If there's a counter-move against the seat, the most logical target is the throne itself. Or the ward structures you have access to. He was thinking out loud, the way he did when he was fully engaged, carefully, building each thought on the last. If someone could disrupt the foundational wards, could they break the compact? Theoretically, Hermione said. The compact is tied to the land's magical signature, but if you interfered with the ward anchors at the 7 major magical sites, Hogwarts, the Ministry, Gringotts, Azkaban, Hogsmeade, you could potentially disrupt the land's ability to recognize the seat holder. It wouldn't destroy the claim, but it might functionally disable it. He's going to go for Gringotts, Harry said. Everyone looked at him. The ward anchor at Gringotts is the oldest. It's the deepest. And Voldemort knows, or will know if he doesn't already, that Ragnarok and I have a working alliance and that the goblin records are the primary validation for my claims. If you're going to attack the seat, you attack its most important institutional support. Harry folded the letter and tucked it into his pocket. Which means I need to meet Narcissa, and I need to do it before Voldemort realizes that she's considering switching sides. When? Ron asked. Today. He looked around the table. I'll go alone. Absolutely not, Hermione said. I need to build trust with her. If I show up with backup, it signals that I don't take her at her word, which starts the meeting in exactly the wrong register. He looked at Hermione steadily. She's not a threat to me. She's a woman who's spent 20 years being dangerous because she had to be, and she's been asked to be something different for possibly the first time. That deserves to be taken seriously. Hermione pressed her lips together in a way that meant she disagreed with the security arrangement but accepted the reasoning. Where? I'll write and ask her. Somewhere neutral, neither of our ground, somewhere neither side would have warded. He thought. The leaky cauldron is too public. The Gringotts' private rooms would be ideal, but that's my ground. There's a tea shop in Muggle London that Neville's grandmother mentioned once. Apparently she and Augusta used to meet there in the 70s because neither of them trusted anyone's house. Neville, do you have the address? Neville blinked, then smiled slightly. I actually do, yes. Gran mentioned it last Christmas. She'll find it funny that it's being used for something like this. Harry wrote to Narcissa. The reply came within the hour, agreed. 2:00. Come alone. Beneath that, almost as an afterthought, bring the black ring. She'll need to see it. He understood what she meant. The black ring meant family, and family meant trust where political assurances might not reach. The tea shop was in Bloomsbury, 3 streets from the British Museum, wedged between a bookshop and an estate agent. It was the kind of establishment that had been there so long it had stopped needing to advertise, with steamed windows and mismatched chairs and a menu written on a chalkboard in handwriting that had clearly been done by the same person for 30 years. It was entirely Muggle, which made it genuinely neutral. No wards, no magical surveillance, no way for either side's people to monitor it without physically being present. Harry arrived at 1:55 and took the table in the back corner, facing the door. Narcissa Malfoy walked in at exactly 2:00. She was not what you expected, if what you expected was a woman defined by her husband or her associations. She was tall, precise, blonde in a way that had nothing theatrical about it, dressed in Muggle clothes with the careful accuracy of someone who had studied how to blend in without quite managing to be invisible, because some people simply couldn't be invisible regardless of what they wore. She scanned the room when she entered and found Harry immediately and walked to the table without hesitation or performance. She sat down. Looked at his hands. At the rings. The black seal, she said. He held up his right hand, showing her the black ring. She looked at it for a long moment, and something in her face shifted, not softened exactly, more like a door that had been braced against weight finding the weight suddenly removed. She poured herself tea from the pot Harry had already ordered. You're younger than I expected, she said. Even knowing your age. People keep saying that and then revising their opinion, Harry said. The corner of her mouth moved. Almost a smile. Yes, I imagine they do. She set down her cup. Draco first. Can you do what I asked? A formal letter of protection under the seat is going to the records office this afternoon. Draco Malfoy will be registered as under the protection of the Compact, which means, under the ancient Compact's terms, which have been legally reactivated along with the seat, any action taken against him by a party to the Compact constitutes a breach requiring formal response. He met her eyes. Voldemort may not care about legal frameworks, but the registration will be public, and it tells his followers that moving against Draco has political consequences. It makes him a more expensive asset than he's worth. Narcissa was quiet for a moment. Something very deeply held in her seemed to settle. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. Tell me about the countermove. She did, and Harry listened without interrupting, which she seemed to appreciate. The counter-move was this: Voldemort had spent 3 months, since the night at the Department of Mysteries, researching the seat of the true ruler. He'd found, in a source that had taken considerable dark library resources to locate, a reference to an ancient ritual, the compact sundering, that could theoretically sever the connection between a seat holder and the land. It required 7 simultaneous attacks on 7 ward anchors, coordinated within the same hour. He doesn't know about Gringotts, Narcissa said. He knows the Ministry, Hogwarts, Azkaban, Hogsmeade, and 3 others. He doesn't know Gringotts is a ward anchor because the goblins have never disclosed it, and he doesn't trust goblins enough to have good intelligence on them. When is he planning this? Within the fortnight. He's been waiting for confirmation that the seat was claimed. He needed it to be active for the ritual to work. Your claiming of the throne yesterday accelerated his timeline. She looked at him without apology. I'm sorry I couldn't warn you before. You couldn't warn me before because you hadn't decided yet, Harry said. What decided you? She considered the question honestly, which he appreciated. 2 things. Your letter said you knew the difference between someone who chose evil and someone who was cornered into it. She picked up her teacup again. And the throne claiming. When it went through the island, when every magical creature felt it, she paused. It felt like something ending. Or something beginning. It felt like the kind of thing you choose a side for. She looked at him. I chose. Harry nodded. Voldemort's 7 targets, what are they specifically? She gave him the list. He didn't write it down. He had the memory for it, and writing in front of her felt like a signal of distrust. When she'd finished he said, he's going to know you've told me. Eventually. But not for a few days. I've been careful. She set down her cup. I won't be able to stay where I am for much longer. The protection letter for Draco will be noticed. When you need to move, send a Patronus to Ragnarok at Gringotts. He'll arrange transport. You'll have sanctuary at a location I've arranged. He held her gaze. You and Draco both. She looked at him, really looked at him, the way Ragnarok had in the subterranean chamber, the appraising and careful attention of someone accustomed to dealing in deception, trying to find the angle in an offer that seemed too clean. Why are you doing this? Truly. Because you're useful, Harry said honestly. And because it's right. Both things can be true. The ghost of the smile again. Dumbledore would have said only the second. Dumbledore was a better person than me and a worse strategist, Harry said, and Narcissa made a small sound that was genuinely, briefly, a laugh. They talked for another 40 minutes. When they left, they went in different directions, she north toward the tube, he south toward the embankment, and Harry walked along the river with the afternoon light on the water and turned over everything she told him piece by piece, the way you turn over stones to see what's underneath, organizing it all into a picture that was becoming increasingly complete. Voldemort's timeline was 2 weeks. 7 targets. A ritual that required coordination and significant magical resources. A plan that was brilliant in exactly the way plans made by people who'd underestimated their opposition were brilliant, thorough, carefully researched, and 2 days behind events. Harry pulled out the small notebook he'd taken from Ron's Quaffle collection, the one he'd kept for himself, and wrote 3 words. Don't let him. Then he put it away and sent a Patronus to Ragnarok, his first Patronus from the new configuration of his magic, and it was different, brighter and steadier than the stag had ever been before, though it was still a stag, still absolutely itself, with the message, we need a meeting. Tonight. The term sheet can wait. We have a security conversation to have first. The stag bounded away across the Thames, visible only to magical eyes, and Harry watched it go with the particular satisfaction of someone who has finally, irreversibly, stopped playing defense. Voldemort had a 2-week plan to break the compact. Harry had 19 house seats, a Goblin Alliance, a Wisengamot majority, a formally pledged Neville Longbottom, a brilliant Hermione Granger working on a creature charter, and Narcissa Malfoy's intelligence sitting warm in his memory. He also had something Voldemort could not account for, which was the land itself, all of it, the island from the Channel to the Orkneys, humming with a recognition that had been building for 1100 years. He started walking back toward the tube, already composing the centaur letter in his head. Chapter 4, the Wizengamot session was called for Tuesday. Harry requested it on Sunday morning through Madame Ogden's office, which had the effect of causing Madame Ogden to send back a reply within the hour, on a Sunday, confirming the session with the crisp efficiency of a woman who had decided that whatever was happening with Lord Potter was the most professionally interesting thing that had occurred in her 30-year tenure and she was going to be at the center of it. The stated agenda was 3 items: formal review of the wrongful imprisonment cases Harry had flagged, a motion regarding the legal status of non-human magical beings, and an item listed simply as legislative corrections, which was vague enough that it could mean almost anything and specific enough that several Wizengamot members, upon receiving their notification, spent Sunday evening sending increasingly anxious letters to one another. Harry spent Sunday at Gringotts. The office Ragnarok had prepared was exactly what the goblin's footnote had promised, a well-appointed room 2 sublevels below the main hall, with walls of the same warm stone as the inheritance chamber, a desk that was large and old and had clearly been waiting in a Gringotts vault for someone to use it properly, and a chair that was comfortable without being ostentatious. There were bookshelves already stocked with legal texts and historical records. There was a fireplace connected to a private flue network that included Gringotts, the borough, and 3 goblin administrative offices. And there were, when Harry arrived, 6 goblin liaisons waiting with folders. The meeting about Voldemort's 7-target plan lasted 4 hours. Ragnarok listened to Harry's summary of Narcissa's intelligence with the composed attention of a man who is very angry and very controlled about it. When Harry finished, the director of Gringotts was quiet for a moment, and then he said, in the careful tone of someone choosing precision over expression, "The ward anchor beneath Gringotts has been here for 900 years. No one has ever successfully identified it as such. Narcissa says he doesn't know about it. His list is 6 targets, not 7. Ragnarok's expression shifted into something that was very specifically goblin satisfaction, the particular look of a creature who has been given an advantage and already knows how to use it. Then his ritual cannot succeed. All 7 anchors must be struck simultaneously. If he attempts it with 6, the ritual fails. Possibly catastrophically for the participants. Harry leaned back in the desk chair. But I don't want to simply let him try and fail. I want to be ready at every target point, because even a failed compact sundering with 6 simultaneous attacks on 5 major magical sites will cause significant damage and casualties. You want to intercept the attacks. I want to have people in position at every target. Not just to defend, to capture. He looked at Ragnarok. This is the first time since his return that Voldemort has committed significant forces to a coordinated action on a specific timeline we know in advance. I want to use it. Ragnarok looked at Harry the way he had in the inheritance chamber, the long, assessing look that preceded genuine professional respect. You want to spring the trap. I want to spring the trap, Harry agreed. I need goblin cooperation to hold the Gringotts anchor point and to monitor ward activity at all 6 of the targets he knows about. I need Kingsley and whatever Aurors he trusts to be positioned at the Ministry and Hogsmeade anchors. I need Hogwarts defended from inside, which means, Professor McGonagall, Ragnarok said. Professor McGonagall, Harry confirmed. And I need Neville with me at whichever point Voldemort personally attends. He said it matter-of-factly, and Ragnarok received it the same way. He'll be at Hogwarts or Gringotts. The 2 most symbolically significant targets. I need to be at one with Neville at the other. You believe he'll come himself? He's not going to trust something this important to his followers, Harry said. He's never trusted it to his followers when it matters. And the seat of the true ruler is personal for him. He spent his whole career trying to become the dominant power in Britain, and I've just claimed the one position that makes all of his ambitions structurally impossible. He paused. He'll be there. He wants to look at me when the compact breaks. Or so he believes, Ragnar said. Or so he believes. They spent the remaining 2 hours working through target coverage, defensive protocols for the ward anchors, and the specific goblin battle magic that could be deployed in the Gringotts tunnels if necessary. Harry had known, in a general way, that goblin battle magic existed. Sitting in the room while Ragnar outlined it, calmly, professionally, with the specific vocabulary of a species that had been fighting humans off and on for 9 centuries and had refined the practice considerably, was a different kind of knowing. By the time the meeting ended, Harry had a reasonably complete plan, a goblin alliance with actual teeth, and a very clear sense of the timeline. 12 days. Monday he spent at the Burrow, which was becoming something between a home and a command center, a shift that Mrs. Weasley was navigating with the pragmatic grace of a woman who had spent 30 years feeding an Order of the Phoenix and was very good at producing large quantities of food and pretending she wasn't listening to strategically significant conversations. Hermione had the creature charter spread across the kitchen table and was 40 pages into a draft that had already been through 3 revisions. Harry read the current version over breakfast and made 2 comments, both about specific phrasing in the House Elf section, that Hermione noted and was quiet about for a moment before saying, "You're right," with the crisp decisiveness she applied to corrections she agreed with. Ron was writing out fair copies of letters to the Centaur leaders at Hogwarts. Harry had drafted them, Ron had better handwriting, and Neville was in the garden with his wand, running drills. Harry watched Neville through the window while he ate. The other boy was running through a sequence with the fluid economy of someone who had been practicing for a long time, each spell clear and clean and correctly timed. Harry thought about what Narcissa had said in the tea shop. It felt like the kind of thing you choose a side for. He thought about the Longbottom pledge book, and the Augusta Longbottom signature above Neville's. He thought about the prophecy and the 2 boys it could have named, and the way Neville had said "I'm not offering" out of guilt with the specific dignity of someone who meant it. He went out to the garden. Neville stopped when he heard the back door. "Session is tomorrow," he said. "Yes." Harry picked up a practice wand that was sitting on the garden wall, one of Ron's old ones, clearly, shorter than Harry's and less responsive, and turned it over in his hands. "How are you at fighting in enclosed spaces?" Neville blinked. "Depends on the space." "Why?" "The ward anchor points are underground. Tunnels, chambers, mostly stone. Not a lot of room to move." He set the practice wand down and turned to face Neville properly. "I'm going to need you at Hogwarts, not at Gringotts. McGonagall will be there but she can't hold the anchor point alone if it comes to a full assault." Neville absorbed this. "You're going to Gringotts. Ragnar thinks Voldemort will go to Gringotts because it's the vault. The symbol of goblin wealth and wizard trust and the foundational records of my claim. Voldemort understands symbols." Harry paused. "I think he might be right. So you'll face him there?" "Not a question." "Probably." Neville looked at him with the expression Harry had come to recognize as his honest face, no performance, no reassurance, just Neville taking in reality and deciding what to do with it. "Are you ready for that?" "Yes," Harry said, and meant it without qualification, which was new and entirely stable. "All right." Neville picked up his own wand again. "Show me what the tunnels look like. I'll start adapting the drills." Harry spent an hour in the garden with him, sketching ward anchor chamber layouts on a piece of parchment and working through movement patterns for confined space dueling, and somewhere in the middle of it Hermione appeared at the back door to tell them lunch was ready and then stayed at the door watching them for a moment with an expression Harry only peripherally caught, something warm and private that she replaced with brisk efficiency when she saw him glance over. He filed that away for later, the way he'd been filing several things for later. Later was starting to develop a considerable backlog. The Wisengamot session on Tuesday had 49 members in attendance, which was nearly full. The notification had specified that attendance was strongly encouraged, a phrase that was not normally in Madame Ogden's vocabulary and that people had correctly interpreted as something significant is happening and you should be there. The gallery above the main chamber was also occupied, for the first time in recent memory, by a clutch of journalists, not just the Prophet, but the Quibbler, whose editor had received a personal note from Harry suggesting coverage might be of interest, and 2 correspondents from international magical papers whose presence indicated that the throne claiming had indeed rippled outward further and faster than the British press had managed. Harry arrived at 8:55 with Ron and Hermione in the gallery and Neville 2 steps behind him, and took his highest-tier seat with the same quiet authority he'd demonstrated at the acknowledgement session. The chamber's energy was different this time, not the shell-shocked quality of last Friday, when the sheer unexpectedness of Harry's claims had stunned people into compliance, but an awake, watchful tension, like a room full of people who've had the weekend to think and have arrived with questions. Good, Harry thought. Questions were useful. Fudge was not in the minister's seat. His absence was conspicuous enough that several members kept glancing at it, and the witch currently occupying the deputy minister's chair, a sharp-faced woman named Amelia Bones, who headed the DMLE and whose presence Harry had been counting on, looked at the empty seat with the precise expression of someone who has been waiting for a particular vacancy. Dumbledore took the chief warlock's seat and called the session to order with a tap of his wand on the chair arm, and the chamber went quiet with the reflexive respect of people who have listened to that sound for decades. First item, Dumbledore said. Review of wrongful imprisonment cases, as submitted by Lord Potter. Harry stood. He had the cases organized in the order he intended to present them, not chronologically, but in terms of argument strength, building from the clearest to the most complex. He laid them out without notes, because he'd read every file twice and the details were solid in his memory, and he spoke in the same even voice he'd used on Friday, not loud, not emphatic, not performing urgency. Just facts, presented in sequence, with their implications made clear by their own weight. The first case was straightforward enough that it passed in 14 minutes. A wizard named Selim Rowell, convicted in 1981 on the basis of a Veritaserum-assisted confession that had been administered without a St. Mungo's certification, a procedural violation so basic that its presence in the conviction record suggested either spectacular incompetence or deliberate corner-cutting, and Harry's face made clear he knew which. The Wisengamot voted 41-8 to order an immediate retrial. The second case took longer because the subject was still in Azkaban and several members were squeamish about acknowledging that someone might have been sitting in a Dementor-patrolled prison cell for 15 years on invalid grounds. Harry let them be squeamish for exactly as long as it took for Amelia Bones to intervene, and Bones did intervene, efficiently and with the specific focused energy of someone who had been waiting for a legal pretext to address something she'd had doubts about for years, and the vote was 37-12. By the time he reached the seventh case, the rhythm had established itself, and the chamber had found a kind of momentum, not enthusiasm, exactly, but the forward movement of a body that has started correcting something and discovered the correction feels better than the error. 40 minutes into the session, Harry had motions passed on all 11 cases, with a formal review committee assigned, chaired by Bones, with authority to order retrials and emergency releases. Second item, Dumbledore said. Harry reached into his robes and produced the charter. Hermione's draft, revised through 4 iterations over the weekend, had been printed on Gringotts quality parchment and bound with a simple black cord. It was 43 pages long. Harry did not distribute copies yet. He set the charter on the railing in front of him and addressed the chamber. This is a proposed charter of magical creature rights, he said. I'm going to summarize the key provisions and then open the floor, because I want this to have proper debate rather than a summary vote. The chamber's energy shifted. Several members exchanged looks of the kind that indicated complex political calculations were occurring. The charter establishes legal personhood for non-human magical beings currently classified as non-persons under the being, beast, and spirit register. Specifically, house elves, centaurs, mere-people, and, in a separate provision for further negotiation, giants. He held up a hand before the murmur got momentum. Legal personhood does not mean identical rights to wizards. It means the right to refuse coercion, the right to have grievances adjudicated, and the right to enter into contracts of their own free will rather than having contracts imposed on them. He paused. For those worried about the practical implications for households that currently employ house elves, a voluntary contract, freely entered, remains fully valid. The only thing the charter removes is the absence of the word voluntary. The murmur went through the chamber again, louder this time, and it had a different quality, not simply resistant, but fractured, some voices audibly opposed and some audibly surprised into consideration. Harry had been counting on that fracture, because a divided opposition was infinitely more workable than a unified one. A member named Tiberius Ogden, not related to Madame Ogden, or possibly distantly, stood. He was old enough that his memory of the original compact's terms was historical rather than academic. Lord Potter, the Charter's second provision concerns voting representation on the Wisengamot for magical creature delegates. That is a constitutional change of considerable magnitude. It is, Harry agreed. And I want to be clear about what I'm proposing. Not seats on the main Wisengamot. Observer seats, initially, 2 per recognized species, with the right to speak but not vote on matters that directly affect their communities, and the right to vote on those matters with a majority recommendation. He met Ogden's eyes. The compact this government was built to honor included all magical creatures. It hasn't honored that in centuries. The Charter is the beginning of honoring it again. And if the chamber declines, ask someone else from the lower tier, a voice Harry didn't immediately place. Then the compact remains partially broken and we continue governing in the pretense that Britain's magical community is exclusively human, while asking non-human magical beings to nonetheless abide by laws that have no representation for them. Harry looked out at the chamber. That position has historically ended badly. He gave them 20 minutes of debate. He let the arguments run, not every argument, and he came down hard on 2 speakers whose positions slid from political objection into something less acceptable, both times with a precision that made the relevant members sit back down quickly, and then he called the vote. 33 to 16 in favor. The Charter passed. He heard Hermione make a sound from the gallery that she would probably deny having made, and felt a specific satisfaction that had nothing to do with power and everything to do with the fact that something deeply, stubbornly wrong was being made less wrong. Third item, Dumbledore said, and his voice had the quality it had carried throughout the session, stripped of politics, just the functioning of a man doing his job with full attention, because whatever else Albus Dumbledore was, he was very good at the work when he chose to do it honestly. Legislative corrections, Harry said. He pulled out a second document. This one was 3 pages, dense with specific statute numbers and brief amendments. There are 14 provisions currently on the Wisengamot's books that are inconsistent with the Charter we just passed, that were originally passed through irregular process, or that represent significant departures from the foundational legal principles this body was established to uphold. I'm moving to repeal all 14. He read them. The chamber listened. 5 of the provisions were clearly, obviously overdue for repeal, small cruelties built into old law, things that had been left on the books through inertia rather than conviction, and those generated almost no opposition. 4 more generated debate that Harry managed with patient clarity. The remaining 5 were contested enough that he was prepared for the argument, and he made it, case by case, not from emotion but from the specific legal architecture of what the compact required and what the Wisengamot's founding charter had promised. The repeal motion passed in omnibus. 38 to 11. Harry sat back in his chair. The session had been running for 2.5 hours. The chamber had the quality of a room that has been doing heavy work and knows it, tired but not resentful, which was the balance Harry had been aiming for. He hadn't tried to overwhelm them. He'd tried to build the case well enough that refusing it felt worse than accepting it, and he'd given people room to come to that conclusion themselves. Dumbledore surveyed the chamber for any further items, found none, and closed the session with the formal tap. As the members began to file out, the room's usual post-session conversation started up, but different from the previous Friday. Less anxious, more substantive. Harry noticed several members who had voted against his motions nonetheless lingering in conversation with members who had voted for them, the particular body language of people working through a position rather than defending it. He was gathering his documents when Amelia Bones appeared at the end of his tier. She was a stout witch with short grey hair and the direct gaze of someone who had run the Department of Magical Law Enforcement for 17 years and had developed excellent instincts about people. She looked at Harry for a moment before speaking. The review committee will be operational by Friday, she said. Staffed from DMLE, independent of the Aura department. Results in 6 weeks. Thank you, Madam Bones. Don't thank me. It should have happened years ago, and the fact that it didn't is, in part, on this body. She said it without self-flagellation and without deflection, just honest accounting. Lord Potter. Fudge will not go quietly. I know. The inquiry motion passed last Friday. He can refuse to testify, which creates its own legal problem for him, or he can testify and create a different legal problem. He's been advised by 3 solicitors over the weekend, which I know because 2 of them are connected to DMLE through professional associations and word travels. She looked at him steadily. He may try to create a political incident. Something to discredit the inquiry before it can proceed. What kind of incident? He has a story, Bones said carefully. About your history of making unfounded claims. The Triwizard Tournament, your insistence on Voldemort's return, what he intends to characterize as a pattern of self-aggrandizement. She paused. He's planning to give it to the Prophet. Harry considered this. Let him, he said. Bones blinked slightly. Lord Potter, Fudge giving a story to the Prophet about my credibility, the week after the Wisengamot has passed 11 motions based on my submissions and formally acknowledged my 19 House seats, is not a threat. Harry picked up his folder. It's a gift. It tells everyone watching that the minister's response to legitimate legal challenge is personal attack, and it tells the Prophet's readership, who are not, on average, stupid, that the minister is more concerned with my reputation than the underlying facts of the cases I raised. He looked at Bones. If he goes to the Prophet, we let it run. Then we let the first 3 Azkaban case reviews produce their results, and we let those results speak. Bones studied him for a moment, and Harry could see the calculation running, the specific assessment of a competent, experienced official deciding whether this boy's confidence was substance or performance. She apparently reached a conclusion. Right, she said. I'll keep you informed of the inquiry progress. I'd appreciate that. She left with the same directness she'd arrived with, and Harry had the thought, not for the first time, that the right people had been there all along, waiting for a political framework in which they could function as intended. He was nearly at the chamber exit when Lucius Malfoy appeared in the corridor. It was not an accidental intersection. Malfoy had waited. Harry clocked the position, the angle, the particular deliberateness of a man who has placed himself where he intended to be, and he was alone, without the usual entourage, which was either a show of confidence or of vulnerability, and Harry wasn't immediately sure which. Malfoy looked older than he had the last time Harry had seen him, which had been in this building a month ago, and the age was the specific kind that came from things not going as planned. The silver blonde hair was as precise as ever, the robes expensive, but there was something around the eyes that was working hard. Lord Potter, he said. Malfoy. Harry stopped. Not warily, just stopped, giving the man his attention. I understand you filed a protection letter for my son. I have. Malfoy was quiet for a moment. The corridor was nearly empty now, the last Wisengamot members having moved on to the lifts. May I ask why? Because his mother asked me to, and her reasons were sound. Harry kept his voice level and entirely without malice, which seemed to be more unsettling to Malfoy than hostility would have been. And because Draco made his choices under significant pressure from a situation he was born into rather than one he chose. That's worth acknowledging. Lucius Malfoy's expression was very controlled, and beneath the control was something Harry identified, after a moment, as the specific pain of a man who loves his son and has made the child's life demonstrably worse through that love's particular expression. He's safe. For now. He needs to stay visible and stay away from active Death Eater activity. The more clearly he's associated with the seat's protection and the less clearly he's associated with Voldemort's plans, the more protected he becomes. Harry paused. You know this, actually. You understand how the political protection works. Yes. Malfoy's jaw shifted slightly. And his mother? Is handling her own affairs with great competence, Harry said, which was technically true and entirely opaque, and Malfoy's eyes told Harry that he understood it to mean Narcissa had made contact. Something moved in the man's face, relief, or something adjacent to it, quickly controlled. I'm aware, Malfoy said, carefully, that my position is complicated. That the inquiry will reach certain conclusions. Yes, Harry said. It will. And there's nothing, no, Harry said, quietly but without hesitation. Not because I want to see you punished. Because if the inquiry doesn't run properly, everything else I'm doing doesn't mean anything. You understand that? Lucius Malfoy looked at him for a long moment. The man had spent his entire life in a system built on who owed whom and what leverage sat where, and he was trying to find that structure in this conversation and finding it absent. Harry waited while he found his footing. The inquiry will find what it finds, Malfoy said finally, with the precise dignity of someone accepting a verdict they've already internally acknowledged. He straightened slightly. I won't contest it. Good, Harry said. Thank you. That last surprised Malfoy, the genuine thank you, without irony. Harry left him in the corridor and went to the lifts. Ron and Hermione were waiting in the atrium, Neville beside them. Hermione had the charter clutched to her chest and the expression of someone who has been trying not to vibrate with satisfaction for 2.5 hours and is finally allowing it. 33-16, she said immediately when Harry reached them. I know. I was there. The observer seats provision, she continued. That's the important one. That's the one that, Harry, do you understand what this means for magical creature rights in the long term? The observer seats are the first formal acknowledgement in British law that non-human magical beings have standing. Once you have standing you can build on it, you can, I know, Harry said, and smiled, which was the specific smile he used when Hermione was exactly right and being exactly herself about it. That's why we drafted it. Ron said, Fudge wasn't there. No. Bones told me he's working on a press strategy. Harry checked the time on the atrium clock. We have about 3 days before he goes to the Prophet. Let him. We have bigger things to focus on. He looked at Neville. Can you get to Hogwarts tonight? I want you to speak to McGonagall before the end of the week. I'll go this afternoon, Neville said. She already knows something's happening, Gran sent her a note. Your grandmother is extraordinary. She's going to be insufferable about it for at least a year, Neville said, with a tone that made clear he had no actual objection to this. They walked toward the Fleurs, and Harry thought about the 11 people who were going to be reviewed for release from Azkaban, and the house elves who would have legal personhood by Friday when the charter was formally enacted, and the 14 bad laws that would be struck from the books by the end of the week, and Sirius's name on a public register somewhere as wrongfully imprisoned rather than guilty, and he felt the weight of it, not heavily, not as a burden, but as something real. The good kind of heavy. The kind that meant something had actually moved. Harry, Hermione said, as they reached the Fleur stations. Yes. She looked at him with the directness she used for important things. The session today, the charter, the cases, all of it. That was the right use of the seat. She said it plainly, without the qualifications she usually added to high praise because she was careful about not inflating things. Exactly the right use. Harry looked at her. The backlog of filed-away things from the past week pressed against the filing cabinet slightly. Are you busy tonight? She blinked. No. I mean, I was going to work on the Centaur Charter section but that can, she stopped. Looked at him with a slightly different expression, recalibrating. Why? I thought we could have dinner, he said. Properly. Not at the Burrow kitchen table with 6 people and strategy documents. The expression she'd had in the garden when she thought he wasn't looking crossed her face again, openly this time, and she didn't put anything over it. Yes, she said. All right. Ron made a sound from 3 feet away that was very clearly audible and just as clearly pretending to be a cough. Harry looked at him. Ron looked at the ceiling. Nothing, Ron said. Absolutely nothing. Nothing at all. Harry stepped into the flue and said, Diagon Alley, and went, and as the green fire closed around him he heard Neville, from somewhere, saying quietly to Ron, only took 6 years, and Ron's response of, 4, actually, I started noticing in 3rd year, before the flue connection swallowed the rest. The day was doing well enough that he was almost prepared for what was waiting at Diagon Alley, or rather, who? Draco Malfoy was standing outside the flue exit at the Leaky Cauldron, looking like he'd been standing there long enough to have rehearsed what he was going to say several times and discarded all the rehearsals. He was without robes, just dark clothes, muggle enough to pass, with his wand visible in his jacket pocket. He was thinner than Harry remembered and the characteristic Malfoy certainty was absent, leaving behind someone who looked younger than 17 without it. He saw Harry step out of the flue and set his jaw in the way that meant he was going to say something difficult. I need to tell you something, Draco said. About the next 2 weeks. Something my mother didn't know to tell you because she wasn't in the room when they said it. Harry looked at him steadily. Around them, the Leaky Cauldron's afternoon clientele carried on with the deliberate non-observation of people who were absolutely listening. Inside, Harry said. Draco nodded and followed him through the pub and out into Diagon Alley, where the afternoon had gone golden and the lamp posts were just beginning to consider lighting, and Harry listened while Draco Malfoy, in a voice that was stripped entirely of pretension, told him the piece of Voldemort's plan that no one else knew. The 7th target wasn't Gringotts after all. It was Harry. Chapter 5, What the Land Remembers. The 7th target was the seat holder himself. Draco explained it in the alley behind the Leaky Cauldron, standing with his back to the wall and his arms crossed in the way people stood when they were trying to take up less space than usual. The compact sundering ritual didn't just need 7 ward anchor points struck simultaneously. It needed the seat holder to be actively suppressed at the moment of the 7th strike, magically bound, or unconscious, or dead. The land's connection to the seat ran through the person, not just the throne. Break the person at the right moment and the ritual could work with only 5 of the physical anchors intact. Voldemort had kept this provision entirely out of the briefings he'd given his inner circle. Even Draco had only caught it because he'd been in the wrong corridor at the right moment, translating a fragment of old magic that the Dark Lord had been reviewing alone. He'd understood it immediately and said nothing, because he'd been very carefully saying nothing for 6 months, managing the specific performance of a boy committed to a cause he'd stopped believing in enough that even his father had stopped questioning it. Harry listened to all of it. Then he said, "You're not going back." Draco looked at him. You're not going back. You know too much and you've told me too much, and even if you went back tonight acting exactly as normal, there's a version of events where something gives you away and you end up in a situation nobody recovers from. Harry kept his voice flat and practical, because Draco was clearly more comfortable with practical than with anything warmer. The protection letter is already filed. Gringotts has it. You go to your mother and you both go to the location she has for emergencies and you stay there until this is over. Draco was quiet for a moment. My father is cooperating with the inquiry. Voluntarily. Harry saw the surprise on Draco's face. Yes. He told me this afternoon. He paused. Whatever you think of how he got here, he's here. Something moved in Draco's expression, complicated and private, the kind of thing you didn't perform for an audience. He nodded once, sharply, and pushed off the wall. The ritual requires everything to happen within the same 60-minute window, he said. Once the first anchor is struck, the window opens. If anything interrupts the sequence, the ritual collapses. Harry had been thinking since Draco started talking, building the shape of it. Which means the thing that matters most is identifying when the window opens. The first strike is the signal. The first strike will be the easiest target, Draco said. The one he's most confident about. Probably Hogsmeade, it's the smallest anchor and the least defended. Right. Harry was already running the timing. Who's at Hogsmeade right now? 3 Death Eaters. Low level. Scouts. Draco said it with the clipped precision of someone reporting rather than confessing. He sends them in pairs usually, but 3 means he's planning something. Harry pulled out the quaffle notebook, his own copy, not Ron's, and wrote 3 things. Then he put it away. You need to go. Tonight. Draco looked at him with an expression Harry hadn't seen on his face before and couldn't immediately name. It wasn't gratitude, exactly, and it wasn't respect in the conventional sense, but it was something that had never been in the room between them before. The particular look of someone who has just been treated as though their choices matter. Potter, he said. Draco, Harry said. When this is done, Draco stopped. Worked at something. When this is done, I'm not going to pretend any of this was simple. Good, Harry said. Simple would be useless. He held the black ring up briefly, the same way he had with Narcissa. The signal. Family. Tell your mother to send the Patronus to Ragnarok tonight. Don't wait for morning. Draco looked at the ring for a moment. Then he left, walking quickly north through the alley without looking back, and Harry watched him go and then turned and went in the other direction. He met Hermione for dinner anyway. It was a small Italian place in Muggle London that she'd suggested by Owl while he was walking back through Diagon Alley, and he arrived 10 minutes late because he'd stopped to send patron users to Kingsley and McGonagall and Ragnarok with updated information. She was already there, at a corner table with a glass of wine and the particular expression she wore when she'd been thinking hard about something and had reached a conclusion she was deciding whether to share. He sat down and ordered and told her about Draco immediately, because he didn't do information compartmentalization with Hermione. She was too useful to keep in the dark and he trusted her completely, and both of those things had been true for years regardless of what else might also be true. She listened, turning her wine glass slowly. So the window is 60 minutes from the first strike. Yes. Which means you need to be the 7th strike. Not a ward anchor. Yes. She looked at him. You're going to let them try to reach you. I'm going to be at Gringotts, which is where the confrontation needs to happen because that's where Ragnarok has the best operational control and the deepest goblin resources and the ward anchor I can actually use. He reached for the bread basket. But knowing I'm the 7th target tells me something important about Voldemort's strategy, which is that he intends to get close enough to personally deal with me rather than sending followers. He's the 7th strike. He comes for me personally. And you want that? Yes. Because if he comes personally, we can end it personally, and I don't have to spend the next 5 years hunting him through Europe while his followers rebuild. Harry broke a piece of bread. This is the battle. Right here, in the next fortnight. I want to fight it cleanly. Hermione was quiet for a moment, thinking. The ward anchor at Gringotts, you said you have a connection to it now, through the seat. What can you actually do with it? He'd been thinking about this since Tuesday. The anchor is a convergence point. Magic flows through it from the land into the ward structure. Normally it just maintains the wards passively. But if I'm there, in the chamber, actively connected, I can direct it. He paused, working out how to describe something that wasn't fully in language yet. It's like the difference between a river flowing through a landscape and someone who can open and close the gates. I can't generate power from it, it's not mine to create. But I can shape how it moves. And if Voldemort tries to use the compact sundering ritual while you're actively connected to the anchor, then he's not trying to suppress someone standing apart from the land, Harry said. He's trying to suppress someone who is, at that moment, functionally the same as the land itself. Hermione considered this with the intense, focused attention she gave to things that were important. That's not a defense, she said slowly. That's a reversal. If you're the channel and he directs the ritual energy at you, it comes back through the anchor. Harry. She set down her wine glass. That could be devastating. The ritual energy reflects back through someone who's also trying to direct the compact's magic in the other direction. You'd be standing at the intersection of 2 enormous magical forces pushing against each other. I know. You could, I know. He looked at her steadily. It's also the only scenario in which the ritual is completely destroyed rather than just interrupted. If it's merely interrupted, he tries again. If it reflects, the ritual architecture collapses and the energy has to go somewhere. She was thinking fast. If you control the anchor at the moment of reflection, you can direct where it goes. She looked at him with an expression that was past alarm and into something fiercer. You'd need to be precise. Extremely precise. Split-second decision about where to push the energy. Yes. Have you ever done anything like that before? No, he said honestly. But I think I understand it well enough to do it once. Hermione pressed her lips together in the way that meant she had approximately 40 objections and had decided to file them behind the more important conversation. Is there a version of this plan where you're not at the intersection of two enormous destructive magical forces? Not if I want to end it cleanly. Right. She picked up her wine again. Then we make sure everything around you is as controlled as possible. I'll work with Ragnarok on the anchor chamber, its physical structure, ward layering, what can be reinforced beforehand. Neville and McGonagall at Hogwarts. Kingsley at the Ministry and Hogsmeade anchors. She was already planning, reorganizing the pieces, which was Hermione engaging fully rather than objecting, and Harry valued it more than he could have easily said. Ragnarok's battle magic teams at each anchor point. Yes. And we need someone watching the Hogsmeade anchor for the first strike, someone who can send a signal the moment it's hit. That's the clock starting. I'll do it, Hermione said. I need you at Gringotts. You need me at Hogsmeade to start the clock and then you need me at Gringotts, she said, with the crisp authority of someone who has decided something and doesn't intend to discuss it further. I'll apparate the moment I send the signal. Hogsmeade to Gringotts is 40 seconds at full speed. I'll be there before the sequence has barely started. She met his eyes. Don't argue with me about this. I wasn't going to, he said, which was true. They ate dinner. At some point, he couldn't have said when exactly, because the conversation moved between strategy and other things without announcement, it stopped being a working meeting and became something else, the thing it had been building toward all week, all year if he was honest, probably longer if he was very honest. Hermione laughed at something he said about Ragnarok and he watched her face when she laughed and stopped trying to file it away for later, because later had developed enough of a backlog and this was now. She walked back with him toward the tube and somewhere between the restaurant and the station she took his hand, not with announcement, just the natural movement of someone reaching for something they've decided to stop not reaching for, and Harry turned his hand over and held hers properly, 19 rings and all, and felt the land hum warmly beneath the muggle pavement and thought that was probably not entirely a coincidence. The next 9 days were the controlled burn of a plan running on a tight timeline. Kingsley moved a team of 6 Aurors, his most trusted, all of whom had been quietly doubtful of the Ministry's official line for months, to cover the Ministry and Hogsmeade anchors. He did it under the administrative cover of a routine ward inspection, which was boring enough that no one questioned it. Bones provided DMLE backup with the same quiet efficiency she'd brought to the review committee. McGonagall, upon receiving Neville's briefing at Hogwarts, was exactly what Harry had expected her to be, completely controlled, strategically precise, and entirely without panic. She'd sent back a one-sentence reply to Harry's follow-up letter, "The school will be ready. Trust Longbottom and he won't let you down." Harry had written back, "I know." McGonagall had apparently spent 4 days quietly reinforcing Hogwarts' ward anchor from the inside, working in the early mornings before staff arrived, using techniques she'd learned from the Founder's notes in the headmaster's office. Ragnarok's battle magic teams were deployed with the minimum of fuss and the maximum of competence. Harry spent 2 days at Gringotts working with the anchor chamber, learning the feel of it, the specific channels through which the compact's magic moved, the points of resistance and the points of flow. It was not like wand magic. It required no movement, no incantation, barely any conscious direction. It required, primarily, a quality of attention, the focused, open attention of someone listening rather than speaking, letting the land tell them its own structure before trying to work with it. By the 9th day he could hold the anchor's full connection for 2 hours without significant effort. Ragnar watched this with the expression of someone checking calibration on a very important instrument and finding it sound. Narcissa and Draco were at the safe house, a property under the seat's formal protection, magically shielded from location tracing, in a part of Scotland so deeply rural that its nearest Muggle neighbour was 4 miles away. Narcissa sent updates twice daily with the Silver Patronus method Harry had arranged. On the 4th day she reported that Voldemort had noticed Draco's absence and was making noises about it. On the 6th day she reported that the Death Eater teams for the anchor strikes had been assembled and briefed. On the 8th day, in the morning update, she said simply, "He knows about the counterplan. Not the details. But he knows you're not passive. Adjust your timeline if you can." Harry read this over breakfast and said, "He moves in the next 2 days." "How do you know?" Ron asked. "Because if he knows I'm active rather than passive, waiting longer is worse for him, not better. Every day I have to prepare is a day he doesn't. He was planning 2 weeks, he'll cut it to 10 days if he thinks the advantage is bleeding away." Harry pushed back from the table. "We go today. Everyone to their positions." The Hogsmeade scouts moved in last night according to Kingsley's report. "That means the first strike team is already in place." Ron stood up immediately, the Quaffle notebook in his back pocket. He'd been managing correspondence and logistics for the past week with an efficiency that had surprised even Harry, who had known him for 5 years and still occasionally underestimated him. The notebook was now 50 pages in and color-coded. "I'll fluk Kingsley. Neville's already at Hogwarts. Tell Kingsley the window is probably tonight. Could be early afternoon if Voldemort's impatient." Harry looked at Hermione. "Are you ready?" She was standing by the kitchen door with her wand in her hand and her bag over her shoulder, which was the most Hermione possible answer to that question. "I've been ready since breakfast," she said. "I've been ready since you told me about this, actually, but specifically since breakfast." Harry looked at her for a moment. They'd had 5 days of dinner and something that was new enough to still feel slightly luminous and important enough that he wasn't going to let it distract him now, which was probably the only genuinely mature thing he'd managed in the past 2 weeks. He crossed the kitchen, kissed her once, quickly and entirely seriously, and said, "See you at Gringotts." "Don't get hit by 2 enormous magical forces," she said, with the tone she used when something wasn't funny and also was. "Working on it." The Hogsmeade first strike came at 3:47 in the afternoon. Harry felt it before the Patronus arrived, felt it through the anchor connection, a distant sharp disturbance in the ward structure, the way you feel a tremor in a building before you hear it. He was already standing in the anchor chamber when the Silver Otter came through the wall and said, in Hermione's voice, "First strike confirmed. 3 Death Eaters. Ward anchor disrupted but holding. I'm coming." The otter dissolves. The clock had started. The anchor chamber beneath Gringotts was everything Ragnarok had promised, deep, stone-walled, lit with the same blue-white torches as the throne chamber, with the ward anchor itself at the center, a column of black stone, waist-height, that hummed with a constant low resonance that Harry could feel through the floor. 4 goblin battle magic teams were posted at the entrance tunnels. Ragnarok stood to Harry's left with the focused stillness of a commander who has been preparing for this for 300 years. The second strike came 4 minutes later. Harry felt it, the ministry anchor, more distant, a harder hit, the wards they're straining. Then the third, barely a minute after that. Hogwarts. He felt it sharp and personal, through the Gryffindor and Hogwarts house connections both, and for 2 seconds his attention split between the anchor chamber and the castle at the other end of Scotland, reaching through the seat's connection to the school's foundational structure the way you reach for a light switch in a dark room you know well. The wards held. He felt McGonagall's reinforcement work, it was specifically hers, the exact magical signature of very controlled, very powerful defensive charm work applied with the patience of someone who has been casting that spell correctly for 50 years. He pulled his attention back to the chamber. Hermione arrived at 4 minutes and 12 seconds after the first strike, which was faster than 40 seconds, which meant she'd done something technically illegal with the apparition and he was going to admire it later. She was slightly winded and entirely composed, took position to his right, and said, "Status. 3 strikes in 4 minutes. Hogwarts held. Waiting on the 4th. Harry kept his hand on the anchor column, not gripping it, just touching, the way you kept a finger on a page you'd have to return to. He's moving faster than the original timeline suggested. He knows we're here, she said. Not alarmed. Just noting. Yes. The 4th and 5th strikes came in rapid succession, 2 of the smaller anchors, both hit hard. Harry felt the ward structure shudder and then stabilize, the goblin teams at those positions doing exactly what they'd been positioned to do. 6th strike, 2 minutes later, Azkaban anchor, which Kingsley's team held with a fight that Harry felt distantly, a series of sharp magical impacts, and then silence that meant either the fight was over or the connection was disrupted, and Kingsley's Patronus arriving 30 seconds later to say anchor secured, 2 neutralized, 1 fled clarified which. 6 strikes in 12 minutes. The window was nearly half spent. The chamber door opened. Not through the tunnels, where the goblin teams were posted. Through the door Harry had come through, the main access corridor from the bank floor above. The door, which had been sealed with 3 separate locking charms and a goblin ward that had been placed that morning, opened as though it had simply been asked to. Voldemort came through it alone. Harry had faced him twice before, in the graveyard, in the ministry, and both times he'd had the specific quality of nightmare made physical, the way things are more terrible in person than in memory. This time was different. This time Harry was standing at the anchor column with his hand on ancient stone, connected to the land from the Scottish Islands to the Channel coast, and Voldemort walked into that room and was the most human-sized thing in it. He was tall, pale, with the red-slit eyes and the flat face of someone who had destroyed too much of himself pursuing the wrong kind of permanence. He looked at Harry across the chamber with the expression of a man who has arrived to complete a task and finds the subject matter less intimidating than he'd been told to expect. "You've prepared," Voldemort said. "Yes," Harry said. "The Goblin Alliance. The Wisengamot. The Creature Charter." He said the last with a faint inflection that was not quite contempt, more the assessment of a strategist acknowledging an opponent's moves while believing they've already accounted for them. "You move very fast for someone who only discovered their power a fortnight ago." "I've been suppressed for 15 years, Harry said. "The speed isn't new. The freedom is." Ragnarok was behind and to Harry's left, still and watchful. Hermione was behind and to his right, wand raised, and Harry could feel her holding her position with the conscious discipline of someone who understood exactly why she could not move first. "The compact sundering requires 7 strikes, Harry said. "You know I know that." "I know you know it," Voldemort agreed, in the particular tone of someone who has already won and is generously acknowledging the loser's intelligence. "I also know you think you can use the anchor as a mirror. Reflect the ritual back." He tilted his head. "That was the second thing your informant didn't know. That I anticipated exactly this." He moved a step closer. "The ritual doesn't need to strike you directly. It needs to sever your connection to the compact. And the anchor," his eyes went to the column, "is precisely where the connection is strongest. I'm not here to attack you, Lord Potter. I'm here to cut you at the root." The ritual started. Harry felt it, different from the ward anchor strikes, because those had been targeted and external. This came from Voldemort himself, a specific dark magical frequency directed not at Harry but at the column, and through the column at the compact itself. Not aggressive. Surgical. The magical equivalent of cutting a wire rather than breaking what it powered. Harry pressed his hand flat against the stone and stopped trying to mirror it. He did something else instead. He opened. Not the anchor. Himself. He dropped the instinctive wand magic defensiveness that 16 years of survival had built, the trained flinch toward protection, and instead let the connection run the other direction, not drawing power from the anchor outward, but opening himself as a channel in the other direction, letting the full weight of the compact's connection run through him and into the land, making himself not a target but a conduit. You couldn't sever a wire by cutting the wire if the wire was the land itself. Voldemort felt the shift immediately. Harry could see it in the precise tension of his expression, the recalibration happening in real time. He pushed harder on the ritual, and Harry felt it as pressure, enormous and cold, and bore it the way you bear something you've decided to carry, not struggling against it but finding the balance point. Interesting, Voldemort said, and the word had nothing in it but genuine assessment, and he raised his wand. Ragnarok, Harry said quietly. The goblins moved. They came from the tunnel entrances, not a charge, nothing chaotic, but 4 teams moving in deliberate coordinated formation with the ancient controlled precision of a species that had been fighting wizards since before Hogwarts was built. Goblin battle magic was not wand magic. It was material and direct, hammers and curved blades forged with enchantments that went back centuries, combined with specific wordless castings that struck like hammers rather than curses. The chamber filled with light, blue, white and gold, and Voldemort turned from Harry to handle the immediate physical threat, and in the moment of divided attention Harry drove the compact connection through the anchor column and outward. The land answered. It was not subtle. Every ward anchor in Britain, all 7, simultaneously reinforced, not by Harry's power but by the compact's own, the land's own deep magic that had been lying dormant for 1100 years and was now being asked to do what it was always meant to do. The Death Eater teams at the anchor points felt it as a wave, some of them later described it as being hit by weather, a sudden shift in magical pressure so overwhelming that staying upright was the limit of what they could manage. Most of them didn't stay upright. Voldemort turned back to Harry, and his expression had changed. The assessment was the same but the confidence underneath it had a crack in it. That's not possible, he said. The compact isn't broken, Harry said. You never managed to break it because you were trying to sever me from it, and I'm not separate from it. Not right now. He stepped away from the column, because he didn't need it anymore, the connection was running through him fully, the land's recognition complete. This is the difference between the power you chose and the power I have. You took everything you could get. I'm standing in what's mine. Voldemort cast. It was the killing curse, which Harry had been expecting, and it crossed the chamber in that distinctive green streak and hit the full force of the compact's connection running through Harry's body, and the land didn't flinch. It absorbed it the way rock absorbs rain, not deflecting, not mirroring, simply being larger than what was thrown at it, and the curse dissolved at the point of contact the way it had dissolved twice before, the same protection scaled to a vastly greater size. Voldemort stood very still. You can't kill the land, Harry said. And right now you can't kill me. The battle magic teams had Voldemort surrounded. He was not unaware of this, or unaware of Hermione circling to his left with a wand that had been raised and waiting for 20 seconds. The crack in the confidence had spread. Harry crossed the chamber toward him, and the compact's connection moved with him, and the amber light from the runes carved into the ancient walls pulsed in time with Harry's steps, and Voldemort, who had not flinched in 30 years, who had built a life on the absolute certainty of his own power, took a step backward. Tom, Harry said, very quietly. Something moved in Voldemort's face at the name. Not anger, something older and more personal than anger, the specific pain of a self that has spent 60 years erasing its origins and finds them suddenly, unavoidably present. It's over, Harry said. Not because I'm more powerful. Because what you want, the thing you've spent your whole life trying to get, doesn't exist. There's no version of you that rules this island, because the island doesn't work that way. It never did. That's what the compact means. He stopped 4 feet away. You can fight. You can probably hurt people before this ends. But you've already lost, because the thing you came here to destroy is more intact right now than it's been in 1,000 years. Voldemort's face worked through something complex and private. He was not, Harry thought, a stupid man. He was a man who had chosen specific answers to questions about power and mortality and had built everything around those answers, and he was standing in a room where every answer had just been proven wrong, and the look on his face was the look of someone in the specific moment of understanding that there is no recovery from this particular error. He cast again, not the killing curse this time, but something Harry didn't recognize, dark and fast, and Harry raised his hand, not his wand, and the compact's connection met it and dissolved it, and Voldemort cast again, and each time the magic hit the connection and was simply gone, not reflected, not repelled, gone, absorbed by something that had been waiting for 1100 years and was extremely patient. Hermione moved on the fourth cast and her spell hit from the side, a binding hex of extraordinary complexity that she'd been composing for 2 days, and it caught Voldemort mid-cast and the binding landed and held, not because her hex was more powerful than his resistance but because his attention was split between Harry and the connection and the goblin teams, and the moment's lapse was enough. The chamber went very quiet. Voldemort was on his knees on the stone floor, bound, and the look on his face was the final one, not rage, not defiance, just the specific, terrible clarity of someone who has lost everything and knows it and has stopped pretending otherwise. The goblin teams moved in with a practiced efficiency that suggested restraining dangerous magical persons was something they'd prepared for, and Harry stepped back and let them work. Ragnarok appeared at his shoulder. "The anchor?" Harry asked. "Intact. All 7 intact." Ragnarok surveyed the chamber with the expression of a man confirming expected results. "The teams at the other sites are reporting the Death Eater groups neutralized. Kingsley's Aurors are processing arrests." He paused. "Lord Potter. The land's connection is still running," Harry said. He could feel it, quieter now, not the full flood of the compact's assertion, but present and warm, the hum he'd felt through the throne chamber floor. "I think it's meant to be like this. Not the emergency connection. Just, present. Background." Ragnarok looked at him for a moment, then made the sound that might have been a laugh. "As it was for the original seat holders." Hermione appeared at Harry's side. She was breathing harder than normal, which was the only concession she was going to make to having just participated in the most significant magical battle in Britain in 20 years. "He's bound. He's bound." She looked at Voldemort, kneeling in the center of the chamber, and then at Harry, and her expression had the quality of something completed, not triumph, which was too simple, but the specific satisfaction of something being set right after a very long time wrong. "What happens to him now?" "Trial," Harry said. "Proper one. With full process and evidence and an appropriate sentence." He looked at Voldemort, who was watching him with those red eyes that had gone from calculating to something that had run out of calculations. "He gets exactly what was denied to a dozen people I just fought to have reviewed. A trial." Voldemort said nothing. Harry turned away, because there was nothing else to say to him, and what remained was administrative and legal and the work of people who handled those things properly. He turned to Ragnarok and said, "Can you secure the chamber until the DMLE arrives?" "Already summoned," Ragnarok said. "Bones is on her way." Harry nodded. He walked to the chamber door and then stopped, because standing in the doorway was someone who had not been part of the plan, who had not been supposed to be in Gringotts at all, who must have arrived in the last few minutes, standing with his wand at his side and a look on his face that was reading the room with the quick, comprehensive attention of a very old and very good strategist. Dumbledore looked at the bound form of Voldemort. Looked at the goblin teams. Looked at the intact ward anchor. Then he looked at Harry. "You didn't need me," he said. "No," Harry said. "But I could have used you more honestly years ago." Dumbledore absorbed this with the dignity of a man accepting something he had already accepted privately. He looked at Voldemort once more, and his face went through something Harry couldn't fully read. It had the quality of a very long debt being settled, or a very long vigil coming to its end. "Is he?" Dumbledore started. "Alive. Bound. Bones is coming for him." Harry stepped aside to let Dumbledore fully into the chamber. "I want him tried. Publicly. With full evidence on the record. Not because he deserves the dignity of process, but because the people he hurt deserve to see it done properly." Dumbledore was quiet for a moment. "Yes," he said. That's right. Ron's voice came from somewhere behind Dumbledore in the corridor. He'd arrived with Kingsley's team and was apparently managing the traffic of Aurors trying to get into the chamber with the confidence of someone who'd been organizing significant logistics for the past 10 days. Right, can we? Sorry, Professor, coming through, and then he appeared in the doorway, looked at the scene in the chamber, at Voldemort on the floor, at Harry with the amber light still pulsing in the runes around him, and said, with the specific eloquence of his best friend of 6 years, "Blimey." "Yes," Harry said. Is it, over?" Harry said. "It's over." Ron's face did several things in quick succession and settled on something that was mostly relief, the deep bodily relief of someone who has been braced for years and is finally allowed to stop. He looked at Hermione. "Are you, fine?" she said. "Very fine, actually." Ron looked at their hands, which were holding each other in the way they'd been holding since Hermione crossed the chamber after the binding landed. He looked at the ceiling. "Third year," he said, apparently to the ceiling. "I knew in third year." "Ron," Harry said. "I'm happy for you, I genuinely am, this is wonderful, can we please get the Dark Lord out of here first?" "That's what I was trying to do before you arrived," Harry said, and Ron laughed. A short, slightly shaky laugh with a lot of feeling in it, and went back out into the corridor to manage the Aurors. Harry looked around the chamber one last time. The anchor column's hum was steady and warm. The runes on the walls were amber and constant. The compact was intact, the land was present, and the thing he'd been born into and suppressed into and fought toward for 16 years was done, and the work of what came next was already waiting. He felt the land acknowledge this, a quiet pulse, the same as the throne chamber floor, the same as the Gringotts bedrock on the day he'd stood on the steps with 19 rings and a newly open sky. "There you are," it said, in the wordless language of very old things. "Here I am," Harry thought back. He walked out of the chamber and into the corridor where the work was already beginning. Chapter 6, What Britain Owes Itself. The trial lasted 9 days. Not because the evidence was complicated, it wasn't, it was enormous and thoroughly documented, and Amelia Bones ran the prosecution with the methodical certainty of someone who had been waiting 17 years to do this job properly, but because Harry insisted on doing it right, which meant every charge read into the record, every witness given time, every piece of evidence entered through proper process. The Wisengamot chamber was full for all 9 sessions. The Prophet ran daily coverage that began, for the first time in 14 months, attempting something in the direction of journalism. Harry attended 3 of the 9 days. On the other 6 he had work to do. The morning after the battle, he'd woken in the small hours at the Burrow with the land's hum low and constant and a list building in his head of the things that needed to happen in the next 30 days, the next 60, the next year. He'd gotten up quietly so as not to wake Hermione, who was asleep in the chair she'd fallen asleep in at 2 in the morning while reading the House Elf Charter final draft, and sat at the kitchen table with the Quaffle notebook and written for an hour. When Hermione appeared in the doorway at 5:45, still in yesterday's clothes, she looked at the 3 pages of notes and said, "You've been up since 3. 4, he said. "Harry. I know." He pushed the notebook toward her. "Tell me if I've missed anything." She sat down and read through the list with the careful speed of someone processing for completeness rather than comprehension. It took 4 minutes. Then she looked up. "The House Elf Emancipation Clause," she said. "You've written framework by end of month, but that's not specific enough. You need a mechanism for voluntary re-employment contracts that protects both parties, the elves' right to leave and the household's right to maintain continuity of service on mutually agreed terms. If you don't specify the mechanism, whoever drafts the implementing legislation will leave holes." "Right." He took the notebook back and added to the note. "What else?" "The Azkaban Review, 11 cases is the formal list, but Bones told me she found an additional 8 during the review committee's preliminary work. Are all 19 on your radar?" "I was waiting for Bones to formally submit the additional 8. She said Friday. She'll submit them Thursday. I spoke to her yesterday." Hermione reached for the teapot and found it cold and got up to make fresh. Also, the International Confederation of Wizards' response to the throne claiming, the Eastern European Accord has formally replied, but you haven't addressed the Spanish Accord or the North American Assembly yet, and they've both sent acknowledgement letters that are increasingly pointed in their requests for response. I'll write today. And the Centaur delegation from the Forbidden Forest sent their reply to the compact correspondence last night by Forest Owl. Gran intercepted it at Hogwarts and sent it on. She set the teapot on the table and sat back down. They've agreed to formal compact participation in principle. They want a face-to-face meeting before signing. Harry looked up from the notebook. The Centaurs agreed. In principle, Hermione said carefully, which was her way of managing his tendency toward optimism when evidence warranted slightly more caution. Bane is still resistant. But Firenze has been advocate in residence for the position since you claimed the throne, and apparently the stars have been saying something relevant. She paused. I think that means yes. That means yes, Harry agreed. The tea was ready and Mrs. Weasley appeared 20 minutes later to find them at the kitchen table with notebooks and tea and the specific productive atmosphere of a working partnership that had been building since 1991 and had finally arrived at its full configuration. She assessed the scene once, asked no questions, and made eggs. Voldemort's sentencing came on the 9th day. The verdict was not in question, the evidence had been absolute and publicly entered, and the sentence the Wizengamot produced was a lifetime in a specifically constructed containment, not Azkaban but a facility the Ministry hadn't previously needed and now had to build, which Harry had specified in a pre-session brief as Dementor-free, secure, and documented properly so the public can verify it's there. The last part was important. The history of convenient disappearances and unverified incarcerations was exactly what the inquiry into Fudge's conduct had spent 2 weeks excavating, and Harry was not building a new institution on the same foundations as the old ones. The sentencing was read. The Wizengamot voted. Voldemort was removed from the chamber by 4 Aurors and Ragnarok's personal security team, a condition Harry had insisted on, the goblins having a professional interest in the man who'd attempted to assault their ward anchors, and the chamber was quiet for a moment afterward, the way rooms go quiet when something very heavy is put down. Dumbledore, in the chief warlock's seat, closed the session. Harry was in the corridor afterward, talking to Kingsley about the deployment rotation for the now decimated Death Eater apprehension cases. They had 17 people in custody from the Anchor Point attacks alone, and the network of active Death Eaters beyond that was significantly reduced but not eliminated, when Dumbledore appeared at his shoulder. A moment, the old man said. Kingsley read the room and found something to do in the other direction with the quiet professional discretion of a man who was going to be Minister for Magic within the year. Harry walked with Dumbledore to one of the alcoves off the main corridor, the deep-set ones with the stone benches that had clearly been intended for exactly this kind of conversation, and they sat, and Dumbledore folded his hands on his knees and looked at the middle distance for a moment. I intend to resign as Chief Warlock, he said. Harry didn't say anything, waiting for the rest. The inquiry's findings regarding my involvement with your inheritance suppressions will be published on Friday. Madame Bones agreed to notify me in advance. Dumbledore's voice was even, neither self-pitying nor falsely composed. The findings are accurate. I've reviewed them and I won't contest them. I know. I won't contest them because they're right, Dumbledore continued, and because the process you've established deserves to operate without interference, and because, he paused, and something moved in his face that Harry had not seen there before, unguarded and old and genuinely tired, because I spent 40 years believing that the best way to protect people was to control what they knew and what they could do. And you've spent 2 weeks demonstrating, quite comprehensively, what was possible when I stopped doing that. Harry looked at him steadily. The Chief Warlock position shouldn't be vacant long. Bones is the right person. She is. Dumbledore allowed himself a brief look that might have been approval. You've already thought about it. I've thought about most things. Yes. The old man was quiet for a moment. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't think that's the right frame for what happened. What's the right frame? Dumbledore considered this honestly. Accountability, he said. And then, perhaps, usefulness. If you'd have it. He looked at Harry. I know more about dark magic, the history of the compact, and the structure of international magical politics than anyone alive. That knowledge doesn't stop being useful because its holder made serious errors. He paused. I'm not asking for a position. I'm asking whether you'd be willing to consult. Harry thought about it. Not long. He'd thought about versions of this question before, because Dumbledore was too valuable to waste and too compromised to trust unchecked, and the balance between those two facts needed a specific structure. Yes, he said. In writing, with full disclosure of any conflict of interest, and without authority over people or decisions. Advice, nothing more. That's entirely reasonable. I know, Harry said. Dumbledore made the sound that, for him, constituted a laugh, brief, dry, and warm enough to be genuine. He stood, and Harry stood with him, and they stood in the alcove for a moment as people moved past in the corridor outside, the ordinary traffic of the ministry doing its daily work, which had a different quality now, a little less hurried, a little less hunched, the specific atmospheric shift of an institution that has had several things removed from it that should never have been there. One more thing, Dumbledore said. The office at Gringotts. You intend to use it formally? Yes. Not the ministry. The ministry is useful and I intend to work with it, Harry said. But the seat of the true ruler's authority comes from the compact, not from the ministry's institutional structure. Operating from Gringotts keeps that distinction clear. He paused. Also Ragnarok has an excellent desk. Dumbledore's mouth curved once, properly, into something that was genuinely fond and genuinely sad and accepted both things being true at once. Yes, he said. I imagine he does. The inquiry report on Dumbledore's conduct was published on Friday, as Bones had said it would be. Harry read it in full at his Gringotts desk, 19 pages, precise and documented, with the specific fairness of a report that neither exonerates nor excoriates, just presents what happened and lets it sit. It was thorough about the suppressions, thorough about the directives on Harry's vaults, thorough about the sorting hat instruction and the blood ward arrangement and the guardianship documentation. It was also fair about the context, the war, the prophecy, the constraints of 1981, the genuine belief in necessity. It presented the whole picture, not a convenient portion of it. That fairness was important to Harry, and Bones had understood that when he'd asked for it. It has to be true, he'd told her, not just damning. If it's only damning, people who want to defend him will be able to find the distortions. If it's true, they can't. The Prophet ran a front page on it that was, by recent standards, actual reporting. The reporter, a witch named Letitia Voss who had been carefully sidelined at the Prophet for 2 years for the sin of submitting accurate stories during the denial period, wrote 3,000 words that quoted the report directly and added only necessary context. Harry had no involvement in what the Prophet chose to publish, but he'd made one call to their editor the previous week, after the session where Fudge had attempted his predicted press strategy and found it landing with the impact of a wet sock. The call had been brief. Harry had mentioned Voss's name as a journalist whose work he found credible. The editor had made his own decisions. Fudge resigned the same day the report was published. He sent a formal letter to the Wisengamot clerk that cited personal health reasons, which was technically true in the sense that his political health was in catastrophic condition. The deputy minister stepped into the role temporarily. Kingsley began what Harry privately considered his inevitability tour, a series of conversations with Wisengamot members that had the quality of someone being elected rather than campaigning, which was the best kind of election. Harry was not involved in the ministerial selection. He was deliberately and conspicuously not involved. The seat of the true ruler was not the ministry and the ministry was not the seat, and every decision he made about how to use his authority was aimed at making that distinction as clear and functional as possible. He attended Wisengamot sessions. He exercised his voting bloc on matters that bore on the compact. He used the legal mechanisms he'd inherited and the foundational connections to the ward structures and the formal recognition of the Goblin Alliance. He did not try to run the ministry. You're doing that on purpose, Hermione said on a Wednesday evening, 3 weeks after the battle, sitting across from him at the Gringotts desk while he worked through correspondence and she worked through the implementing legislation for the House Elf Charter. Doing what? Being conspicuously minimal about the ministerial transition. She didn't look up from her parchment. You could have significant influence over who becomes minister. You haven't applied any. I have opinions about who would be best, Harry said. But the ministry has to elect its own head. If I put my thumb on that scale, the next minister has a legitimacy problem because their election will be attributed to my influence rather than their own standing. He signed a letter and put it in the outgoing pile. Kingsley is excellent and the Wisengamot will figure that out without my help. Hermione was quiet for a moment, in the way she went quiet when she was revising her assessment of something. You've thought about the institutional separation very carefully. Since Tuesday, he said. 2 weeks ago, the first Tuesday. On the steps of Gringotts. She looked up now. You were working this out on the steps of Gringotts the day you claimed the inheritance. I was working out that whatever I did with it had to be durable, he said. Power that depends on one person being present and functional isn't a structure. It's a tenure. The compact is meant to be a structure. I'm meant to be the steward, not the source. He paused. I got a lot of that from the Goblin texts, actually. The pre-Norman compact documents. The seat holder's role is explicitly described as, I'm paraphrasing, the one who makes the soil good, not the one who is the soil. That's in the documents. Page 47 of the 3rd volume. The one you haven't read yet. She gave him the look that was specifically about being told she hadn't read something, which was one of Harry's favorite of her looks, and went back to her parchment. He went back to his correspondence. The formal compact ceremony with the Centaur delegation happened on a Saturday morning at the edge of the Forbidden Forest. Harry went alone, by choice, because the Centaurs had specified the seat holder, unaccompanied, which he respected as a condition rather than treating as a security concern. He wore no robes, just clothes, which felt right, and the 19 rings, which the Centaur's first representative, a young stallion named Taliesin who served as interpreter, looked at with the focused assessment of someone who reads significance in objects and was finding the reading consistent with expectations. Bane was there. The great dark centaur stood at the tree line with his arms crossed and the expression of a creature that has watched humans for centuries and is extremely unimpressed by nearly all of them. Harry looked at him and nodded without speaking, which was apparently the correct protocol, because Bane's expression shifted a fraction. Firenze stood at the center of the group. The Palomino centaur looked at Harry with eyes that were reading something other than the immediate physical scene. The stars have spoken of this for a generation, he said. Since the seat went dormant, since before that, actually. There was always a prediction of return. We have been waiting. Thank you for waiting, Harry said. It was not patience, Firenze said. It was certainty. The ceremony took 2 hours, conducted in the centaur's own language with Taliesin translating the portions that required Harry's response. It was old and specific and Harry followed it carefully, because doing it right mattered more than doing it quickly. At the end, Bane came forward, and this was clearly significant, from the way the other centaurs registered it, and placed his hand on the compact scroll where Harry had already signed in the formal seal of the seat, and pressed his own mark beside it. The herd of the Forbidden Forest joins the compact, Taliesin said. Harry looked at Bane, who looked back with the specific appraisal of someone deciding, after a very long time, that the thing in front of them is actually what it presents itself as. Good, Bane said, and turned and walked back into the trees, which was apparently the end of the ceremony, and several other centaurs made sounds that Taliesin quietly identified as their version of laughter. The house elf situation resolved itself in a way nobody had quite predicted. The charter had passed and the implementing legislation was in its final draft and Harry had been thinking carefully about how to communicate the changes to house elf communities, because the challenge was not the legal change but the cultural one. Most house elves had been operating within their existing parameters for so long that the absence of a legal requirement didn't automatically produce a felt sense of freedom. He'd been discussing this with Hermione for a week when Kreacher appeared. Harry hadn't summoned him. Kreacher arrived one morning at the Gringotts office with the purposeful manner of someone who has made a decision and is implementing it. He stood in the doorway and looked at Harry and said, in the specific Kreacher voice that had moved, over the past year, from muttering hostility to something approaching direct communication, "The elves have heard." Harry set down his quill. "About the charter?" "About all of it," Kreacher said. He was holding something, a folded square of parchment, which he extended. "From the Hogwarts kitchens. They asked me to bring it." Harry unfolded it. It was signed by 32 house elves, the names written in various sizes and degrees of legibility, clearly by the elves themselves rather than by proxy. It was a petition. They were requesting formal compact recognition, which the charter provided for. They were also requesting, in simple and direct language, that someone explain the contract mechanism to them before it was implemented, because they had questions. "Will you come with me to Hogwarts?" Harry asked Kreacher. Kreacher stood very still. "Master asks Kreacher to come." "I'm asking, yes. You know the kitchens and they know you. You'd make the conversation easier." Harry paused. "Also I think you'd do it better than me." Kreacher looked at him for a long moment with his bulbous eyes, and what was in his face was not the desperate servitude of a creature bound by magic to please, and not the performing loyalty of someone afraid not to be loyal, but something considerably more dignified than either. "Yes," he said. "Kreacher will come." Harry sent a letter to McGonagall, who replied within the hour that Friday afternoon would be available, and so on Friday afternoon Harry and Kreacher went to Hogwarts and sat in the kitchens with 34 house elves and answered questions for 3 hours. The questions were specific, intelligent, and occasionally very funny. The elves had concerns about the transition period. They had preferences about what voluntary contracts should contain. One elderly elf named Tilly had been thinking about this since 1987, she said, which predated Hermione's founding of SPW. By several years, in which Harry did not mention to Hermione because he wanted to have this information for a specific moment when it would be most useful. By the time he left the kitchens the elves had signed the compact petition formally, and Kreacher was in conversation with 3 other elves about what good voluntary contract terms looked like, with the focused expertise of someone who had been thinking about this longer than any of the humans involved. McGonagall met Harry at the castle entrance as he was leaving and walked with him across the grounds in the late afternoon light, and she said, without looking at him, "The castle knows you." "I know," Harry said. "It started in September 1991, she said. "I noticed it then, something about the way the wards responded when you crossed the threshold for the first time. As though they recognized you." She was quiet for a moment. "I thought I was being fanciful." "You weren't." "No." She stopped at the edge of the grounds, where the wards made their outermost boundary felt as a warmth in the air. "You'll come back. In the autumn. To the school. There are things you need to finish. 7th year." She looked at him directly. "You can do both. You're the seat of the true ruler, you can certainly manage a potions OWL retake." Harry laughed, and it surprised him slightly, the genuine, full-bodied kind that came without warning. "Professor, I'm not sure potions is the highest priority right now." "Education," she said, with the tone she'd been deploying on recalcitrant students for 40 years, "is always a priority. Come back in September. Bring Miss Granger and Mr. Longbottom. I expect Mr. Weasley will follow without being asked." Harry looked at Hogwarts, the castle sitting against the evening sky, the lake flat and pewter bright, the towers the same towers they'd always been, and thought about September 1991 again, the 11-year-old on the train who hadn't known what he was going to, and thought about what it meant to come back to something as fully yourself rather than as the suppressed approximation of yourself. "Yes," he said. "All right." The petition arrived on a Thursday morning, 6 weeks after the battle. Harry was at his desk at 8 o'clock, which was normal now. He arrived at 8, worked until 1 or 2, spent afternoons on Wisengamot sessions or compact meetings or the ongoing correspondence with international bodies, came back in the evenings when there was evening work, which there usually was. The office had acquired a second desk, which Hermione used when she was there, and a small sofa that Ron used when he came by to deliver logistics updates and occasionally fell asleep on. Neville's grandmother had sent a plant, which Neville had identified as an ancient magical species that responded to the proximity of the compact's ward energy and was therefore not a decorative choice but a functional one, which Harry believed and which also made a very good plant. The petition that arrived Thursday morning was different from the others. Not in format, it was on standard parchment, the seal was the ministry's standard acknowledgement stamp, the language was the correct formal language of a Wisengamot petition for compact consideration. But the subject line stopped him. Application for formal magical being status, filed on behalf of the community of Hogwarts House Elves, the Hogsmeade Goblin Auxiliary, the Mere-People Council of Black Lake, and associated parties. He read through it. It was 20 pages. It had clearly been written with legal assistance, the structure was sophisticated, the statute citations accurate, the precedents correctly applied. And at the end, before the signatures, there was a paragraph that had not been written by a solicitor, because it had the direct, simple quality of someone saying exactly what they meant without legal packaging. We are asking to be known, it read. Not protected, not classified, not managed. Known. As parties to the compact that this land was built upon, as magical beings who have lived on this island as long as any wizard, as communities with histories and knowledge and things worth saying. We are asking to be known, and to be heard, and to have that recognition mean something in the law. Harry set the petition down. He reached for a quill. He turned the petition to its final page, where the signature block waited for the seat holder's acknowledgement, the formal notation that a petition had been received and would be acted upon. He wrote his name with the careful fullness he'd been practicing, not just Harry Potter but the full formal notation, Lord of 19 Houses, holder of the seat of the true ruler of magical Britain, acting steward of the compact. He put the signed acknowledgement in the outgoing pile. Then he turned to a fresh sheet of parchment and began the response. Not the formal legal response, that would be filed through proper channels by the end of the week. This was something else. He was writing directly to the signatories, in the same plain language the petition's final paragraph had used, because it deserved that reciprocity. Dear friends, he wrote, and sat for a moment with that, because it was accurate and it mattered that it was accurate and he was not going to use language that sounded correct and was hollow. Thank you for this petition. Thank you for asking. You are right that the asking should have been unnecessary, you were always parties to the compact, and what the past centuries of governance failed to honor in that regard was a failure of the people holding the governance, not the compact itself. I am reading your petition with full attention. I will respond formally through the Wisengamot process within the week. In the meantime, I want you to know that I receive this and I understand what it is asking for, and the answer is yes. He signed it. Sealed it with the seat signet, the oldest of his rings, the one he'd come to think of as the working ring, the one that carried the land's recognition rather than a specific house's lineage. He gave it to the courier. He sat back in the desk chair and looked at the morning. The office was quiet, Hermione was at the ministry library, Ron was managing the ongoing Death Eater case correspondence, Neville was at Hogwarts working with McGonagall on the ward anchor reinforcement protocols that the compact's formal restoration had made newly possible. The plant in the corner was doing whatever ancient magical plants did in the proximity of ward energy. The amber runes on the wall were low and steady. He thought about the inheritance chamber. About the basin and the 3 drops of blood and the moment the doors had blown open. About Ragnarok saying the land recognized you, Mr. Potter, and meaning it in every possible sense. About standing on the steps of Gringotts with 19 rings and a newly opened sky and feeling the cobblestones say there you are. He thought about Sirius. He still sat with that daily, the way you sit with a broken bone you've learned to live around, and the living around was not the same as the bone being healed. Sirius's name was in the public register now, cleared and documented, and it wasn't enough, it would never be exactly enough, but it was true, and true mattered. He thought about his parents. James and Lily Potter, who had died at 15 months' worth of his memory, who existed now in the way people who are fully absent still exist, as a permanent shape in the space they should be filling. He thought about the director Ragnar's voice saying your father, James Fremont Potter, and your mother, Lily Joanna Potter, née Evans, and how the full names had felt like introductions rather than history. He thought about the Peveril descent, and the dormant Evans line, and his mother choosing to be a Muggle-born witch because she'd had no idea she was anything else, and living fully in that choice, and he thought that this was the most Lily Potter thing he'd ever heard, and he loved her for it in a way that was completely new and ached accordingly. He thought about Dumbledore. The old man was at Hogwarts, in a teaching capacity, Transfiguration, which was his first subject, the one he'd spent the first decades of his career doing before the war made other things necessary. He'd gone back to it with what Harry understood, from McGonagall's occasional observations, as genuine relief. The consulting arrangement was working. Twice in the past 3 weeks Dumbledore had sent a note with a specific piece of analysis that had been genuinely useful and had asked for nothing in return except acknowledgement that it had been received. Harry had sent back not just acknowledgements but responses, and the correspondence had taken on a quality that neither of them had formally acknowledged was something like reconciliation. He thought about Voldemort. He didn't do this often and kept the visits brief when he did, because there was nothing in the containment facility to think about that was useful, only a man who had chosen wrongly and spent 60 years compounding the choice until the person underneath it was almost entirely gone. The trial had given that full airing. The public record had it. Harry had attended the sentencing and done what he'd promised himself he would do, looked at the man in the chamber and felt neither triumph nor pity but the specific quality of a task completed, something demanding that has been done as well as it could be done and can now be set down. He thought about the house elf kitchens and Creature's face, and the centaur ceremony and Bane's hand on the compact scroll, and the mere people who had sent a formal response to the compact invitation in their own language with a goblin translation attached, and the giants, who were still months from formal compact discussions but from whom a preliminary communication had arrived via a Scottish magical ranger that suggested the groundwork was being laid. He thought about Hermione. He thought about this last and let himself think about it fully, which was a new luxury, the specific, warm, slightly dizzying thing of being in love with your best friend and having had the chance to tell them so, and having them look at you with that particular directness and say something that was exactly true about what they'd been thinking since third year. He thought about her at the kitchen table at 5:45 in the morning, reading 3 pages of notes, and at the Gringotts desk making the creature charter better, and in the anchor chamber with her wand raised and her face composed and the binding hex landing clean and precise, and he thought that the word Hermione and the word home had been nearly synonymous for a long time without his having examined it clearly, and examining it clearly was a good thing. The Floo flared green and Ron came through with a folder and the Quaffle notebook and said, "Write 3 things," and Harry sat forward and the morning's work resumed. On the last Friday of August, one day before Harry intended to write to the Hogwarts Express about September arrangements, a letter arrived that he hadn't expected. It was from Narcissa. She and Draco were still at the safe house. The formal transition out of it was pending the completion of the Lucius trial, which Bones had scheduled for September and which Narcissa had been notified she would need to testify at, and which she had agreed to with the same composed practicality she brought to everything. The letter was not about any of that. It was short, 3 paragraphs, written in the same precise elegant hand as the first letter but with something slightly different in the register, the careful formality still present but worn slightly lighter. "Lord Potter," she wrote. "I have been thinking about what you said in the tea shop, regarding the difference between someone who chose evil and someone who was cornered. I've been thinking about it for 6 weeks, at length, and I want to say something in response. I was cornered. That is true. I made choices within those constraints that I regret and choices I don't regret, and it would be dishonest to arrange them in a more comfortable order. But I want you to know that the choice I made in that tea shop, to trust what you said, to act on it, was not made under constraint. It was the first choice in a long time that was entirely mine. I wanted you to know that it was a free choice, not a desperate one. The distinction matters to me. Draco has started reading. He found a library. He's been in it for a week. I don't know what to do with this except find it very funny and be very grateful. With genuine regards, N.M. Harry read it twice, smiled at the last paragraph, and wrote back the same day. He kept his reply short and honest. Thank you for telling me. The distinction does matter, and it shows. Draco in a library sounds right to me. He's always been better than he let himself be. I hope you're both well. If you need anything before the September date, send a Patronus. He sealed it and gave it to the courier and went back to the petition he'd been drafting for the Marepeople legal status clause. September arrived. On the 1st of September, Harry James Potter, Lord of 19 Houses, holder of the seat of the true ruler of magical Britain, formal party to the re-established compact with every species of magical being on the island, architect of 11 legal reforms, cleared name of Sirius Black, and student of Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry, got on the Hogwarts Express with Ron and Hermione and Neville and a trunk that contained, among other things, 3 different unfinished petitions, a copy of the Eastern European Accords Proposed Alliance Treaty, a letter from Kingsley about ministry restructuring, and a transfiguration essay that was already 2 days late. The train platform was as it always was, smoke, owls, trunks, families. Harry stood on it and felt the lands hum under the King's Cross concourse and thought about 11-year-old Harry here for the first time, pressing through the barrier not knowing what was on the other side. Hermione appeared at his elbow with her own trunk and Crookshanks in his carrier and the look she had when she'd just thought of something that needed to be added to a list. The Marepeople Council reply needs to go to the Wisengamot office by the 15th, she said. I know. I'll draft the formal submission on the train. I thought you might. Also, I found a reference in the secondary source material for the compact history that suggests there's a precedent for a magical creature representative sitting on the Wisengamot as a full voting member, not just an observer, from 1087 AD. I want to look at the primary source before I raise it. Hogwarts Library will have it, Harry said. McGonagall said she'd have the restricted section documents available to us. She paused. She said us specifically. I think she's been looking forward to having researchers who understand what they're doing. She said that about your research specifically, Harry said. In the letter she sent me. She called you the most capable research mind to come through Hogwarts since, he paused, deliberately, Newt Scamander. Hermione turned to look at him. She said that? Exact words. She absorbed this with an expression that was trying not to be as pleased as it was. Harry looked at her and found the warmth of it, the specific pleasure of knowing someone well enough to know what would matter to them. She looked back and found it too, and something passed between them that was quiet and complete and didn't need language. Ron appeared. Compartments reserved, he said. Neville's holding it. There's a first year trying to get in and Neville is politely but absolutely immovable, which is very good. He looked between them with the expression of someone who has spent 6 years watching 2 people not say something and is enjoying the fact that the something has now been said. Can we go? The train leaves in 7 minutes and I want a window seat. They went through the barrier and onto the platform proper, and the train was waiting, red and certain, and the smoke went up into the autumn morning, and around them the platform did its familiar, chaotic self. Harry put his trunk on the train and found the compartment and sat down, and through the window the platform moved past as the train pulled out, and he watched London give way to suburbs and then to countryside, the land opening up in the way it always did once the city released it, fields and hills and the long green roll of England under a clear September sky. He took out a parchment and uncapped his ink. The Marepeople petition was the first thing. Hermione had her own parchment out already, pulling the compact secondary source from her bag. Ron had the window seat, his feet up, the quaffle notebook open on his knee, reading through correspondence with the focused attention of someone managing a process. Neville had a book that turned out to be about the magical properties of plants used in ancient ward construction, because that was Neville. Harry wrote for a while, the train's motion comfortable and steady, the land moving past the window in long familiar sweeps. He'd been watching English countryside from train windows since he was 11 and had barely looked at it then, too new to magical Britain to process anything beyond the immediate and astonishing. Now he watched it with the attention of someone who felt it as well as saw it, the hum beneath the rolling hills, the deep patience of very old rock, the specific quality of a place that has been inhabited by magical people since before its own recorded history. The train went north. The day went bright. He finished the petition, set it aside, and pulled the next parchment toward him, the one he'd been building in his head for a week. Not a formal petition. Not a charter clause or a legal submission. A letter to the house elf community leaders, the formal response to the petition that had arrived on Thursday morning, the one that had said we are asking to be known. He was writing the clause that dealt with representation when Hermione looked over from her own work and said, without preamble, the 1087 precedent is real. I found the primary source citation. A merfolk representative held an actual seat on the Proto-Wisengamot for 37 years. Then we have precedent for full seats, not just observer positions. Yes. She was already writing. I'll have the draft by Hogsmeade. He wrote, the formal acknowledgement of your petition is enclosed under separate cover. This letter is the part that isn't formal. I want you to tell me what recognition looks like to you, specifically, concretely, in the way it would change the actual days of your community. Not what the law should say. What you need it to do. He put down the quill. Outside the window, England went past in the September light, green and gold, old and continuous, the kind of landscape that contains its own history without display. Harry felt the hum of it through the train carriage floor, the land's constant low note, the acknowledgement that had been running since the throne chamber, steady as breathing now, as natural and present as his own heartbeat. There was a great deal of work left. There would always be a great deal of work left, because that was the nature of the thing he was steward of, not a problem to be solved but a compact to be maintained, and maintained meant showing up, every day, attending to it, making the soil good. He understood that now in the way you understand things that have moved from information into bone. He reached for the quill and picked up the next parchment. The land hummed. The train went north. The work continued.